Good morning. Would members of the Public Works and Infrastructure Committee please report to Committee Room 1 for quorum? To take over that motion afterwards. I'll leave it with you if it's added.
Okay.
So I would add them in this order.
Well, it's not here yet, so we're going to start. And if it gets added, that's fine. Okay, we're going to get started. We have a little presentation, but we're going to just hold off till we get through the agenda. So I'd like to call this meeting to order, Public Works and Infrastructure Committee. Welcome committee members and members of other members of council, as well as our audience here today and speakers. We have 12 items on the agenda. It is growing as I speak, and I'll talk about that in a minute. There's screens at the back and the side here to watch what's going on, as well as the clocks, the timing clocks. Also, you can watch it online on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca council. I just want to ask the committee if there's any declarations of interest on any of the issues before us today. Seeing none, I'll move on. Can I have a motion to move the last minutes? Thank you, Councillor Carmichael Greb. All those in favour? That carries. And now we'll go through the agenda. I know. Yeah, I mentioned it. Okay, so PW 23.1, this is the on-demand water service replacement. I'm happy to move that. Okay, all those in favor, that carries. PW 23.2, extension to neighboring communities waste disposal agreement at Greenland Landfill. Any concerns about that, or? So it's moved. All those in favor, that carries. PW 23.3, minor amendment to the City of Toronto street naming policy. There's depths on that? No, there's not. I don't think. They've changed their minds, so I don't have any depths on that. So we don't have any depths on that. Okay, that is moved. All those in favor? Carried. PW 23.4, Sewers and Water Supply Bylaws 2016 Compliance and Enforcement Annual Report. Anybody want to move that? I'm happy to. Okay, Councillor Carmichael Grubbs moved that. Okay, Councillor Mamalidi would like to hold PW 23.4. PW 23.5, Lead in Drinking Water Mitigation Strategy Annual Report. I'll move that. All those in favor, that carries. PW 23.6, Municipal Principles to Guide Transition of the Blue Bin Program. Councillor Carmichael Greb is moving it. All those in favor, that carries. 23.7, Waste Reduction Community Investment Program Pilot Phase. Councillor Mamalidi would like to hold that. I also have some questions on that. So that is being held. PW 23.8, this has depths, free floating car share, so we have 2 depths on that, so deputations. So we'll hold that in my name. PW 23.9, Eglinton Crosstown LRT at grade segment traffic bylaw amendments. Somebody want to move that? Councillor Holyday moves it. All those in favor? That carries. PW 23.10, I do believe we have speakers on this issue. Addition of former municipality logos on street name signs, that's correct. So we're going to hold that in my name. And PW 23.11, Heathfield Drive winter path maintenance. I'll move. Okay, Councillor Holiday is moving. Staff recs on that, and thank you. All those in favor? That carries. Okay, and then PW 23.12, utility locate services. Councillor Mamalady would like to hold that. Okay, so we have a few holds. We also have some additions to the agenda that the clerk staff will circulate. So I will introduce them at this time if the committee is okay with that. There's also one that Councillor Denzelman Wong is working on, but we haven't received it yet. It needed to be modified, so we'll wait to see if we get that. But for now, I'll introduce these ones I have before me. So there is one from Councillor Mike Layton, and the topic is climate adaptation and managing Toronto's stormwater in the face of climate change. All those in favor of that being added to the agenda? Is this, oh, so they've already got these?
No, they were just distributing them right now.
Okay, so they've just been circulated. Okay, a recorded vote's been requested.
All those in favor of adding Councillor Layton's item to the agenda on climate adaptation and managing Toronto stormwater in the face of climate change?
Sure, go ahead.
Point of order, Madam Chair. If I understand this correctly, we're requesting that the Director of Environment and Energy report in consultation with several others, and I wonder why it's at this committee.
That's a great question. Let's ask the clerk. Why is this at this committee? Because the first name is the general, not our division. It's energy and efficiency, or energy and environment.
Division heads report to the division wherever the topic is. So it relates to infrastructure, and that's the primary topic. This is the committee that deals with infrastructure.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So all those in favor of adding the item to the agenda, recorded vote.
Yeah, I don't like them. Yes, so I don't disagree with you. I'm also not a fan of last-minute motions. However, Councillor Layton did submit this several days ago, but didn't circulate it, obviously, to committee members. And the practice of this committee has been to accept these motions last minute, but I have to agree with you. I'm not a big fan of it, but it is for us.
The other part of this equation is it doesn't give the public the ability to come and depute when you do these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. So the practice of this committee, certainly for the last 3 years, has been to introduce motions. Sorry?
He's asking for a report back.
It is indeed, yes.
Or you could, if you wish, add it to the agenda, defer it if you wish for next week. But it is a report back request, not policy decision.
Okay, so our options, the options before us are to take a recorded vote and determine whether we introduce this to the agenda, or the other option before us that I'm being advised is to defer it to another meeting.
You could add it to the agenda and then defer it.
Add it to the agenda and then defer it.
You could defer indefinitely.
So what would or defer, the other option is defer indefinitely. I'm getting all sorts of great options here. So what would the committee like to do?
I'll defer it indefinitely, Madam Chair.
So can we add the item to the agenda before we do it?
I'll move deferral indefinitely.
So you have to introduce it. We have to add it to the agenda in order to do that.
Okay, so
Councillor Mamalady.
I'd like to vote against adding it to the agenda first, please.
All righty then. All right, so why don't you finish your recorded vote?
On the motion to add this item as new business, all those in favor?
Are we doing one at a
Item
time?
on
To add it to the,
item on climate change, all those in favor of adding it to the agenda, Councillor Carmichael Greb, Councillor Holliday, Chair Robinson, Councillor Lee, all those opposed, Councillor Mamalady, that item is added to the agenda.
okay, so do we do, if it's a deferral motion, do we take it at this time?
You can do it right now.
I'd like to move it indefinitely, please.
Or an indefinite motion. Okay, we have a motion before us. Do you want just a general vote or a recorded vote, or?
General vote's fine.
Okay, all those in favor? That is just one, so it's added to the agenda. Okay, the second item we've been asked to introduce, and again, it's up to the committee. I'm happy to work with the committee on these issues. This is dockless bike sharing. And it's a motion from Councillor Mike Layton talking about this type of sharing industry that's happening around the globe. So
It's a report request.
it's a report request. I think it's been circulated to you. I didn't realize it had been, but it's circulated to you. So what would the committee like to do with this?
Madam Chair, I guess nobody else is speaking up, so I'll do it. I'd like a recorded vote on whether or not we should accept it. Again, this is something that should go through its normal course of motions. Doesn't give the city, anybody from the city, the ability to depute and give their opinion on it. And I don't even think it should be here, quite frankly, without going through a process. So I'd like a recorded vote on this because I'd like to vote against it.
And I'd like to raise a point of order as well, again, about the subject matter of the motion. As I read it, it really speaks to the Toronto Parking Authority, who is the service provider of the bicycle systems. And again, I wonder why it's at this committee, and if it may belong elsewhere, would be more effective.
If the clerk could address the committee member's question.
I believe the item deals with public realm, and transportation services is charged with public realm, so I believe it's properly before this committee.
Thank you.
Okay, so the request has been made for a recorded vote.
All those in favor of adding the item to the agenda? Councillor Carmichael Greb, Councillor Holliday, Chair Robinson, Councillor Lee. All those opposed? Councillor Mammoliti. That item has been added to the agenda.
Okay, and there's one last one that I have before me. As I said, we're waiting possibly for another edition, but we'll proceed. This is from Councillor Pasternak. And it's also, my understanding, it's been circulated to you as a new business item. You can see before you, it's a request for a report on the use of diamond lanes on Dufferin Street and Allen Road, or to amend the use of diamond lanes. He is the local councillor in that area. Again, he sent this to me yesterday and to the clerk. Yeah, I will. Yeah, I'll move this to be added to the agenda. All those in favor? Okay, that carries. All right, now we're going to just take a quick break to make a quick announcement about the City of Toronto being awarded 2017's Best Tasting Water by the Ontario Water Works Association, OWWA. I guess I'll just say a few words and then I'll ask Marcus. Is Marcus here? Okay, if you can make your way up. Thank you for coming today. We appreciate you being here. Marcus Furman is the president of the Ontario Water Works Association. And I'm just going to say a few words about the Ontario Water Works Association. They provide leadership in water management through education, innovation, science and technology, as well as improvements in customer relations. So we appreciate all that you do. The OWWA also participates in the development of government policies, and this work is done through dedicated and skilled volunteer water professionals who are committed to water stewardship for the public and all levels of government. At the 2017 Ontario Water Works Association annual conference, entries were provided and received from 8 utilities across Ontario and were sampled and judged unanimously for the best tasting water. The 2017 OWWA Best Tasting Water winner is, drum roll please, the City of Toronto. So, yeah, it's great news. We have very fortunate residents who are the recipients of this amazing water. So we want to thank the OWWA for taking the time to come here and presenting the city with this award. And thank you to the staff, special thanks to the staff in Toronto Water, our amazing staff in Toronto Water, who continue to provide Torontonians with safe drinking water for not just our residents, but businesses and visitors. So thank you to everybody involved. And we'll do the presentation now. Do you want to come up here? Oh, that would be amazing, yes. Just make sure the mic's on. Thank you.
So thank you for the introduction, and thank you for letting everybody know what the Ontario Waterworks Association is. Our conference, which is the largest in the province actually for the water industry, we have close to 1,500 participants a year, made up of municipal operators, consulting engineers and equipment suppliers throughout the province and actually the country. So it's actually a very prestigious and large event. We held it in Niagara last year. It'll be in Niagara again this year. So please come and attend. I think it's quite the event. We have a lot of the ministry there. And for the first time last year, we had a big contingency from the Indigenous water workers, which is a big part of moving forward in the province. So it's a really good conference, and we would like more people from Toronto to come to it. Because, once again, this is the fourth time, I believe, in 10 years that Toronto Water has won the Best Tasting Award or the People's Choice Award at our conference. So it's with great pleasure that I'd like to present the award here. By the way, this is Michelle Grenier. She's our Executive Director of the Association. It's with great pleasure and a little envy, because my day job is I'm Director of Water and Wastewater for the District of Muskoka. So I would like to win it once in a while, but never mind, Toronto wins. I'm going to say that's down to the mass of people that drink Toronto's wonderful water, and I'd like to congratulate all those in your water department for doing this. It's an amazing thing.
Thank you very much. Why don't you come forward at this time? And Lou, would you like, where's Lou, our General Manager of Water, who's responsible for our taps turning on? Sure, we'll come in there. Yeah. I think Okay, we're going to continue. So thank you, everyone, for accommodating that commercial break for Toronto Water. And the best tasting tap water now we know, so that's great to have that on our record. So we are going to continue with the agenda as, not where we left off, but with the first item that was held, which was PW 23.4, held by Councillor Mamalady, Sewers and Water Supply Bylaws, 2016 Compliance and Enforcement Annual Report.
My questions have been answered. I'm good. I'll move it.
Okay, moving it. Thank you, Councillor Mamalidi. That's so moved. All in favor?
Chair?
That carries. It's been moved.
I thought we were at questions, and then immediately it went to,
Okay, do you want to ask a question?
I did.
Okay, go ahead, please.
I wanted to know how many priority outfalls have been identified, that have, where the source has been found and it's been corrected, and those that have not in the Taylor-Massey Creek watershed. Does anyone have that?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes. In Taylor-Massey Creek sewer shed, for the total, for the whole program or during the year?
No, what's outstanding? Because we started so many
Outstanding?
years ago. Yes.
So, outstanding then, priority outfalls as of the end of December, there's 14 remaining outfalls. When we started, there were 41, so we've been slowly decreasing the number of priority outfalls, but we're sitting at 14 at the end of 2016.
And you wouldn't know how long, these are ones that have been difficult to identify?
Yes, we would have to continue our search and trying to find out the source of the contamination. Some of them are very difficult to find. There could have been intermittent discharges, so our staff continue to follow up on trying to delist those outfalls.
And so all the watersheds now have been presumably inventoried, investigated, and we're now just trying to deal with the remainder of the outfalls that are still not, the source of the combined sewer outflows have not been.
So through the chair, yes, we've been through all of the watersheds already, and we are going back through them again. So we're not going to just end the program. We're continuing our search and starting from the beginning. As one of the issues that we found is that cross connections can happen at any time. So even though we may delist an outfall, it doesn't mean that some activity doesn't occur out there where someone has introduced a new cross connection. So the program will always continue, and we will monitor, and if we find that an outfall has to be put back on the list, we will do that and try to find the source of the contamination. Meanwhile, we'll continue to clear the outfalls that are still listed as priority.
Okay. And the best practices versus the P2 plans, have we now done a second round of P2 plans?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, we have. And in fact, if we go to, trying to find the page for you.
Well, there's one on page 15. There's
15, yes. We provide statistics where there's been a significant improvement in compliance with the P2 plans. You can see now some sectors are up, well, photo labs 100%, some sectors are in the 90s. So there's been significant improvement over the course of 2016 on compliance with the second round of our P2 plans.
okay. So there are two auto body refinishing and dry cleaners. It looks like there's still a lot of work to do.
Yes, and you could see from
Oh, it's gone up.
the automotive services section, there's quite a number of facilities. So by far, the largest population, over 2,600 establishments.
Right.
So that makes it a little bit more difficult to for staff to engage all of those groups and get them to comply. So that's why you see a lower number. It's just a much larger population. But our staff continue to work with that sector as well as the individual shop owners.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say thank you. This program, I want to particularly thank Joanne DeCaro and her team for the great work that they do. I think our sewer use bylaw is probably another example of the leadership from Toronto Water. So thank you very much. Please find the sources of those last cross connections. Thank you.
Lady had moved this item. All those in favor? That carries. Let's go to our next item. And our next item is, I think, also held by Councillor Mamalady, if I do, and that was 23.10, or no, that wasn't, that was speakers. Oh, 7. So 7 is waste reduction, oh yes, it was Councillor Mamalady. Waste Reduction Community Investment Program Pilot Phase. I also have some questions if,
Yeah, I'd just like to get a little more indication of what all this is about, in some layman's terms.
So through you, Madam Chair, this is a program that was originally approved in the long-term waste management strategy that was approved by Council in 2016. Essentially, it's a community outreach program where we will work with the community who can put in applications to do certain activities on behalf of solid waste to help improve diversion, reduce contamination, implement programs. They have to apply through this program. The applications will be reviewed and screened for appropriateness. And you'll see in the attachment there's a whole bunch of different criteria, including things like replicability. So we want to make sure that if they're undertaking a program, we can take the knowledge from that program and then apply it to a whole bunch of other different types of situations, maybe different buildings, different organizations. And there's a panel that will go through and review all those applications. So in essence, in very simple terms, this is a little bit of seed money to community organizations who are going to do all the work on behalf of solid waste. They just need some initial starter money to get going, and then all the results we can use to improve our programs.
Community organizations, what does that mean?
So these could be, through you, Madam Chair, these could be different types of not-for-profit organizations, different types of community associations. These are not for-profit enterprises. These are schools could apply to something like this, but these are not for-profit. This is not intended to, do additional research or studies or to make large-scale investments. This is really for ground-based community-type organizations to be able to apply.
Give me some of that criteria of who can apply then. I mean, are we now going to give more money to?
So if you can refer, Councillor, to page 2 of attachment 1 to the document. It gives the list of who would be eligible and ineligible in table 1. So resident, tenant, neighborhood and business associations, service clubs, ethnic community organizations, registered charitable organizations, environmental organizations, school groups, clubs and councils. And then on the right column of that table, you'll see all the different groups that are not eligible.
Are they groups that are fighting City Hall regularly? Are we giving money to people to help fight City Hall?
Well, we would, through the application and screening, we'd be looking at.
How else do I put it? You know where I'm coming from, Madam Chair. Somebody's got to talk about this stuff, right? And it's getting ridiculous.
I agree, Councillor. I'm probably not the one to talk about it.
Well, somebody should.
But what I can say is we will be reviewing these applications for their technical credibility and their applicability to the city, their return on investment, to make sure that we are spending money appropriately. We're giving it to community organizations that are quite willing to work with us to help improve not only their community, but to generate results that we can then transfer into other parts of the community.
I don't know. I sometimes I feel like this committee doesn't want to help me when I talk about these kinds of things, but this is the part that I just don't want. So how do we stop giving money to community groups, as we're putting it, as we're calling it, whose objective is just keep fighting City Hall? How do we stop that in a motion here? Because that's what I want to do. I don't want them to be qualified for taxpayers' dollars to fight the taxpayer. That's what we're doing here. So how do I stop it with a motion? That's how to stop it with a motion, with a speech? You endure me for 5 minutes and then that's it, right?
Barn burner speech. I want a barn burner. Okay, I'm going to ask some questions. Sorry if they're redundant to the general
Nobody answered
manager.
my question in terms of how I could stop it with a motion, right?
Yeah, of course, as part of your speech. You place the motion and then you speak.
I don't want to ruin the whole report. I just want I just want the ability, and I need staff to help me with it, the ability to stop money to go to organizations that fight City Hall.
Okay,
Stop the report.
that's a speech, not a question. We're in question period. Okay, so I have a question, and I'm sorry if they're redundant, because I was paying attention to other issues, but what's the total amount that you're looking at packaging out to these, as part of these grants? What's the total figure?
Madam Chair, it's a maximum of $150,000 per year, and the maximum one individual application can receive is $25,000.
And is that a new money, or is it part and parcel of your current operating or capital, or where is it coming from?
That money was actually part of the long-term waste management strategy line item in the 2017 budget, so that money's already been approved for 2017. It's unlikely at this point that we'll be able to spend it in 17, but it's also included in the capital budget for 18 and future years.
And can you cite an example of where you think this might have been effective? Like I'm thinking of the apartment in the east end, eastish end of the city, that were they were role models on getting
Right.
things organized.
We've got a number of buildings that have been extremely successful in diverting the amount of material. We need to go in there and understand how they've accomplished that, what sort of processes they've put in place. They've been quite willing to actually do that work on our behalf and sit down with us and even take what they've done and take it to the next level. But what they don't have to, they're willing to volunteer all the time that they've got. What they don't have is the money set aside to actually take it to that next level. So what we're looking at doing is providing them the initial money that they need. And in some cases, it's only $1,000 or $2,000 that we'll see in these applications to really take it to the next level. Then we can understand what's been successful and apply that to other similar buildings.
Okay, and so how many groups might be funded then in a given year, given the cap of 150 and the 25,000 max? Potentially.
Yeah, so we could see 6 applications that are $25,000, or we could see up to 150 at 1,000. We don't really know right now until the applications start to flow in and we do the assessment and review.
Okay. And to address Councillor Mamaledy's questions, which I know where he's coming from, these groups would be tactical in nature. Like these would be groups that are creating models that could be really become best practices for other multi-res dwellings, single-family homes across the city. Is that the intent?
Absolutely, that's correct.
Except he's not listening to me, so that's a problem.
Sorry, you asked me to make the motion when I speak.
I was asking questions on your behalf. And, okay, so that's I guess that's what he was getting at, so I'll try to explain that in my speech. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Holyday.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Councillor Mamaledy. He's piqued my interest in this. If I've got this right, it's 150,000, maximum 25 per group. So that means there could be as few as 6 recipients, or by the sounds of it, many. I guess my basic question is, if you approve a bunch of projects through the year, they don't materialize, do you then go down the list looking to spend the whole 150,000? Or do you set a bar and you give these grants out, and what's left at the end of the year is what's left at the end of the year?
Through you, Madam Chair, my opinion on that would be what's left at the end of the year is left at the end of the year. We wouldn't fast-track applications or try to push things through purely to hit a spend limit. We want to make sure they're good applications.
Because I'm aware of other places where a pool of grant money is given, and then suddenly at the end of the year there's this scramble to spend it on the people at the bottom of the list, whether or not they met the standards of the application process, without naming names. So I can be assured that although it's a budget of 150,000, you may not spend it all each year.
You have my assurance, Councillor.
Okay, the other, so there's no ratification process at the council or committee level. I'm assuming with this report, you're asking for delegation of that 150, maximum 25, and that it goes to, I guess it's a working committee of staff's discretion to award this money?
Yes, the recommendation is to give the authority to the Deputy City Manager of Cluster B to identify the review panel of 3 members, and Solid Waste will provide the technical expertise to review the applications.
So the last question, I'm going to struggle here to articulate it carefully. When we're dealing with solid waste, we're dealing with stuff, and we're dealing with places. So you can point on a map, you can say, you know, this issue is within this geographic boundary or at this address if it's a multi-res building. The criteria in which you select initiatives, are they rooted in things and places, or are they potentially rooted in ideas? And that's, I guess, where you go along the continuum of a group or somebody that wants to transfer an idea all around the city. Frankly, I'm more concerned about places and things where we can really see and touch and feel the tangible results. You can measure the tangible results. You can say, you reduced this much waste or you diverted this much waste. Can you assure me that that's what you're looking at, is those tangible things where you can quantify the delivery at the end of the day?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, I'm certainly looking for the tangible items, and the criteria that we've laid out in the attachment, I think, certainly reflects that. We want hard programs that are with measurable results so that we understand exactly what the return on the investment is for doing that. If that doesn't necessarily say, though, if there's an idea that comes forward that leads to a tangible activity, those may be considered, but the primary focus is on tangible activities and programs that can be replicated somewhere else.
And if I could put through you, Madam Chair, to the General Manager, I think that's when people get really upset with the government, is when money goes out and there isn't a way to measure it back. Can you give me some examples of the tangible results that you will use to first screen the applications and then B, evaluate the applications as they're seen through? Is it, tons diverted, participation rates? What are the things you're looking for, if you can give me some ideas?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, both of those. The tonnage diverted, the amount of contamination reduced, the amount of additional materials captured, the participation rates within the buildings, the cost per ton diverted, cost per contaminated ton reduced. Those types of quantifiable metrics are absolutely going to be part of the reporting process that we're asking for from each of the buildings. So once they get this money, they then have to continually report back to us on a key set of quantifiable metrics, again, as part of this measurement of the return on the investment.
Last question, I just want to understand the scope of this program, so it's multi-year. Will you come back at some point in time and talk to us about what you did with the money? And will we have another chance to consider whether or not this was money well spent at the end of the day?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. So we'll report back. We'll get reports back on an annual basis on the use of this money. This is included in the capital program, but it'll have to be approved on an annual basis to continue through this program. And then at the 5-year review of the long-term waste management strategy, which is now only 3.5 years away, we will do a complete revisit and review of this process. But from my perspective, if we find through year one that this has not been successful, or we're not seeing the types of applications or the value in doing this, we'll discontinue the program.
And that's through the budget process, I guess.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Holliday. So we're going to move to speakers. I'm going to say a few words. Councillor Mamalady, anybody else would like to? So I'll just quickly say that I do understand where Councillor Mamalady is coming from. I have concerns generally with the community funding grants that we have here at City Hall. I think they're, quite frankly, a little out of control. I think we're spending a lot of money on things that maybe don't have any return, and I think there's even some abuse. And so I understand why Councillor Mamalady might not be too keen about this. I think this is a very different endeavor. This is, I want to call it kind of boots on the ground approach to finding ways to educate, whether they're single-family dwelling homes or multi-use res all across the whole city, no matter what type of home you live in. It's an opportunity to educate people on waste reduction, which is not getting enough, not really getting highlighted enough in this city as a problem, because we're way below our target, our annual targets, and we have a long-term waste management strategy that this body adopted, and we're not really getting where we need to go. So I also am a bit hesitant about this, because it seems like, again, we're spending money, and we've been doing a lot of that lately. Spending money, saying yes to everything. And I think that, generations down the road are going to pay for these years. But having said that, I do think this will, we're going to measure this. We're going to fully assess this. It is a small amount of money, and we won't continue it if it's not effective and if it's not really producing results. I think we have that commitment from staff that they're going to be on top of this and watching this unfold. So I will be supporting this, but I will also be keeping my eye on this program. Councillor Mamalady.
I do have an attempt at a motion, Madam Chair, and I am sorry for having slighted you if that's how you felt. But I think that it's worth noting what the motion will try to do is just stop funding any organization that spends the money in fighting City Hall. And that's what I'd like to do. That's why I pointed this out, because you're right, Madam Chair. Should I introduce the motion first? I'm not sure if it's ready. The language just speaks to that, but I'll let the clerk read it if she's got it.
Is it in order?
I don't know, you're the
It
chair.
sounds, well, it just sounds a bit broad, what you're making it sound like it's a citywide.
Earlier I did ask for some help from staff, and you said just do it when you speak, so I did it when I speak.
Okay, we have a motion before us. Please read it thoroughly. It's very, okay, so,
Okay, so
I love it.
without anybody's help, and I'm a little discouraged that I did reach out to staff and the clerk and the chair to find some language that would be acceptable. Nobody came to my defense. So
I'm voting for this.
good. So let's be really clear. You were right about one thing, Madam Chair. We're spending a lot of money, especially lately. In fact, we've spent over $1 billion more than we did last administration. We've increased our budgets. And next year, that's going to double. So we are spending a lot of money, and some of that money is going towards groups that are well organized, know what they're doing. They're able to somehow squeeze the grants from the city in every single department, and they go to all the same kinds of groups in the City of Toronto, who in return take that money and tell City Hall what they're doing wrong. And that happens regularly. And I think that while the endeavors here and staff have something that they want to do, I think I applaud them for thinking about that when it comes to, landlords and, that sort of concept where you're trying to educate people around our process. I think you're going to find that some of these environmental groups, for instance, that you're choosing to give money to, will try to filter out that particular portion of money and bring it right back to City Hall on the front steps and tell us how bad we are. So that's what I want to stop at City Hall with this, because it happens regularly through other grants and other money that we give people. You may as well just tell people to just slap you in the face and then give them the $10,000 after they do it, or vice versa. But that's the intent here. I don't want to take up all your time. I just want to be cautious and stop doling out money to groups that are well organized and are advocates for their own causes.
Okay, if there's any other, is there any other speakers? No, so this is being proposed as an amendment to the report, Councillor Mamalady, correct? So I will ask for a vote on the amendment.
It's in order?
It's in order. The clerk wrote it. I did not. That carries. And the report that's before us, the item as amended is the proper. So let's see, what do we got here? We got a unanimous vote. Okay, congratulations to staff on that. We're going to move to our next item, PW 23.8, free floating car share pilot and interim policy. And we do have deputations on this, so we'll start there. Our first speaker is Justin Van Det, or no, I'm sorry, it's not. That's another item. Our first speaker is Kevin McLaughlin, advisor, founder of AutoShare. Welcome, Kevin. So you have 5 minutes, Kevin, to speak, and only 5 minutes. We have to cut you off at 5, unfortunately. You can watch the clock here, which I'll set in a minute, and your mic's on, is it?
I think so, yes.
Okay, so you can go ahead.
Good morning, councillors and staff. My name is Kevin McLaughlin, and I first came to City Hall to talk about car sharing almost 19 years ago with AutoShare. Today I'm here speaking on behalf of Communauto, which is a company based in Montreal and is the oldest car sharing company in North America at about 23 years old. We want to thank you and especially staff for all the work on this report And we certainly support it and applaud the opportunity to bring more shared mobility to the city and give people and businesses the opportunity to not own a vehicle and get around the city. I've included a bit of a presentation. Unfortunately, my coworker is stuck in travel right now. It gives a bit of a background on Communauto, which is one of the few car shares that combines both return trip car sharing, which is like Zipcar and Auto Share, where the car has a specific spot in the neighborhood, and free-floating car share, which is what the report today is talking about, where the vehicles move around the cities. And you can drive it one way. The important thing here is that car sharing, numerous studies have shown that car sharing helps people live without owning a car, and therefore helps to reduce the demand for parking in our neighborhoods and in our cities, as well as bringing other environmental and economic benefits. A couple of things in the report that are that we'd like to highlight. One is that a recommended price has not been set, and in this document I've included some prices from other cities which were not shown in the report, including Montreal and I'm sorry that not numbered here, but towards the back, about 10 pages in, Quebec City, Montreal, Halifax, Victoria, Vancouver, and Calgary, which range from $30 a month to, $30 a year to over $1,100 a year, or in the case of Victoria and some of the U.S. cities, a higher rate, but that also includes metered parking, which I understand that this report is not including. And so I just wanted to highlight that in terms of cost. Certainly, we, as a company, are very focused on delivering services to the community, and our system works when the vehicles are moving around, so we'll certainly be very aware of any concerns about vehicles, so-called clustering in neighborhoods and things like that. But we certainly look forward to producing some data from this pilot project, if it's approved, and looking at, for instance, the number of vehicles and hopefully even parking permits that have been returned from the people that are participating in this. Today, Communauto has over 2,000 vehicles in eastern Canada, from Ottawa out to Halifax, as well as Paris, France. And they would really love the opportunity to bring their service here to Toronto, both free-floating and return trip, and improve the transportation and mobility in the city of Toronto. So thank you very much. Today, I'm certainly happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you for being so succinct. Any questions? I have a question. So, you go ahead because you're visiting. Go ahead, Councillor Doucette.
Thank you very much. So do you represent a car share company right here in Toronto right now?
No, I personally don't work or represent a car sharing company in Toronto. I could be back here talking about ride hailing in a couple of months, but today I'm just helping my friends at Communauto.
So right now in our report, we've got 4 companies working right now in Toronto who would be, if this goes through, would qualify to get these free-floating. So you don't have a company to add us to 5 companies. That's what I guess I'm getting at.
The Communauto, I'm not aware of what the 4 companies are. I know that there's Zipcar and Enterprise and Car2Go, but Communauto is very interested to participate and would certainly, for instance, if there was a start date of March 1st, would be here with cars March 1st.
Okay, so we could be looking at 5 companies then.
Oh, yes. I mean, we're here because I'm here speaking on behalf of Communauto and as a representative of the company, because they're very interested in coming to this city, and I would certainly be helping them do that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I've got a question for you. So my understanding is I've heard a rumor in this building that a lot of councillors who are very pro the environment are actually opposed to this. And I don't know if that's true or false, but I wanted to ask you to speak to them through this question, is how does this benefit the environment? You alluded to that in your presentation, because my understanding it does.
Yes. Well, the main idea is that through availability of car sharing services, people are able to access a car when they need one without needing to own a car. And today, there are probably 1,500 or more shared vehicles in the City of Toronto. And on average, each one of those vehicles takes anywhere from 2 to 10 other vehicles off the road, which means less traffic, less pollution, less demands on our neighborhood parking. So for instance, I live in Cabbagetown and I don't own a car. And so, without, and use a number of shared services to help my family and I move around the city. And so, the number one indicator of vehicle usage is ownership. And so as we get people to use other kinds of services, then they can make that decision for each trip based on the need of that trip rather than the investment they've made in a vehicle and insurance and all the rest of the sunk costs that go into owning a car. So that, when you own a car, the next trip is basically almost free. So people tend to use a vehicle in that manner.
So you're saying it does have significant environmental benefits?
Yes, it does.
And it does reduce carbon emissions?
Absolutely.
Because the very people who talk about that at council all the time, they're not here.
Right.
Surprised. Are opposed to this.
A number of studies have shown that a typical car share member can reduce their carbon emissions by over 1 ton a year. These are studies, I believe it's in this presentation, but certainly there's studies that Communato has participated with at universities, proper studies. My understanding that some of the councillors that are most concerned about it are the councillors that live downtown and in the densest neighborhoods and have, tend to get more calls in the evening from people who can't find a spot on their street. The larger issue is as our city becomes more dense and as we change the way we move around, we may need to, again, look at a kind of a fairness policy as more people are living in the city and want to use the streets. We may not be able to kind of claim the right to the parking spot in front of our street. But again, the key here is that, and I believe the study from this pilot will show, we will reduce the number of the demand for on-street parking, private on-street parking, by creating opportunities, better opportunities to access these kinds of mobility services. And this kind of on-street parking permit, if you will allow people to use those services more.
Okay, I've got one more question. The same councillors often talk about different modes of transportation and how we have to move away from the car and look at all different modes of transportation and promote those. I came down on a packed subway today, couldn't move. Your colleague couldn't make it here today because of congestion and gridlock. Will this help with congestion and gridlock?
It absolutely will help. Will you wake up after the pilot starts and have a better commute? Absolutely not. But this is one tool in the toolbox. And as we design our cities for more shared mobility, more people are going to be able to live without a car. And when you live without owning a car, you can make a choice to walk or use a shared bike or use your own bike or whatever it is based on that particular trip. And so the more people that don't own a car, the less likely they are to jump in their car because it's there and easy. And so, yes, this certainly will contribute to it, but again, it's part of a bigger effort.
Right, okay, thank you. Any other questions we have a Councillor Holyday has a question for you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. So you touched on something that came up in the past, and that is councillors that are concerned with parking in already congested neighborhoods. What's before us is not a permit to park anywhere. It's a free-floating parking permit. So how do you deal, or how do you plan to communicate with your customers about where they can and cannot leave a vehicle? And when they don't follow the rules, how are you going to address that? Do you have a system in place? Do you go and move the car? Do you have GPS technology that a little alarm flashes at some central computer that says, this car's not supposed to be here? And I will put to you that, yes, you may get a ticket. You may get a ticket. I mean, we have to go through considerable effort to issue those tickets, but it doesn't deal with the issue of the very angry people in the neighborhood where something is blocked, or their driveway's blocked, or there's some other problem. Help give me some assurance that you've got this part covered.
Thank you. So with all deference to the existing free-floating service in the city, which I happen to use as a customer, the way they've approached, let's say perhaps their frustration with not having this kind of permit before, is that they've communicated to their customers that basically they'll pay certain kinds of parking tickets. And, I do think that they're going to have to re-communicate to their members to get them to start, using this permit process rather than the existing situation. Communauto has the opportunity to start fresh with their customers and communicate the idea that if approved, this would be an opportunity to park in residential permit areas as approved. And certainly blocking driveways or anything else is not, is no less acceptable from somebody in a shared vehicle than it is in any other vehicle. And certainly, tickets and things like that people get are passed on to them, so they have the same, and in fact, with an administrative fee, so it's actually more expensive. So certainly, the same kinds of incentives or negative incentives apply to our customers, and we certainly would communicate them with about all those kinds of things. All the vehicles do have modern technology in them, so we can track if there's certain problem areas or something like that. We can set alarms that people are leaving vehicles in a hospital zone, or whatever concerns might be raised. Again, for us, this system works when the vehicles move. So having vehicles all clustered together or sitting in a place for long periods of time is not in our interest, and certainly the business is run to move those around.
I have one other question, and I'm just going to place it because I'm not sure of my time here, but which is okay. I think I'm within the time here. One of the troubles. No, I'll behave. One of the troubles that we've had is that certain areas of the city are sold out in terms of there's a wait list to get a parking space. So what do you do if you rent a car or if you've got visitors? You go and you purchase a temporary permit through the city, which I understand is a little bit of work to do, and you put this paper in your dash and so on. Would your company be attracted to a system that worked a little better with you with respect to temporary permits? So it really boils down to there will be certain places in the city that are oversold. You just can't park the car because there's no space. And I think the neighbors in that area would appreciate it, but there are certain places in the city with availability, maybe many places in the city with availability. So what I'm sort of going at here is maybe a system that's not completely free-floating, but is free-floating but restricted, and then you pay as you use those spots. Is that something that would attract your company to the city, or would you just find that too cumbersome?
Certainly we would look at any opportunity to bring the business to the city. And, obviously being able to communicate clearly to customers where they can and can't park, how the system works and that sort of stuff is important. And if such a system were in place, I think we'd look at it and try and understand how it would work within our system and that sort of thing. I think, what is important, for instance, I went to dinner the other night in the beach, and I know that the beach also has, my understanding is difficulty parking and that sort of stuff, a local tourism economy and that sort of thing. But if we can't bring these kinds of shared services to communities like that, they won't get the opportunity to live without a car or let's say they won't get the incentive to live without a car. And so I think we have to also consider that, and it is one of the benefits of running a pilot project and collecting the data and reporting back, is trying to look at the opportunity to, in fact, get people to some folks who are parking right now. Certainly, when we get a huge snow day, it's amazing, you get 3 feet of snow, it's amazing how few vehicles actually need to move. And so, maybe some of those vehicles could in fact just be retired. Thank you very much.
We have another deputant, and that is Marco Vivani. It's Vice President, Strategic Development, same.
Sorry, it's not the vehicle traffic, he's coming from Montreal.
Oh, so he's who you refer to. Okay. Is there anybody else that we've missed? Okay, that's great. So I'm going to ask the committee, the General Manager of Transportation has a short presentation on this. Would the committee like to hear that presentation, or it's up to you? I'm trying to be inclusive. I'm seeing a head shaking yes and a head shaking no. How do people feel? Move on? Okay. All right. How long is the presentation? 10 slides. Okay. Sure. The question is whether you could just do a shorter version of the, yeah. Okay, take it away.
Thank you. That was the smoothest technology transfer I've known.
I'm impressed.
Yeah, I am as well. Thank you. Okay, let's, in the interest of time, let's move beyond the overview. The first part is talking about what is car sharing currently in Toronto today, the existing model. We have a number of car share vehicle parking areas. In fact, we have 40 such areas in the city where it's a permanent parking space that's reserved for a car share vehicle. They launch and return to that same place. They're dedicated and they can't be used for other parking purposes. And that program has a permit fee and it generates about $100,000 in annual revenue for the city. This program is allowed in residential parking areas. However, there are some criteria around that. It's not allowed to park or have a dedicated space in front of a single-family home, and not in areas where there's an existing wait list, as Councillor Holliday referred to in his remarks. And then there are some tiers of annual fees that are related to the location of those parking spaces that get increasingly higher as the impact on the parking supply is perceived to increase. So with the highest being when the space for a car share space will eliminate or reduce a paid parking space. Okay, some of the benefits of car sharing, the speaker referenced a number of them. There's been a relatively comprehensive study completed by the Transportation Research Board, I believe in 2015, that identified some tangible outcomes about reduced vehicle ownership rates for car share members, reduced household transportation costs, reduced vehicle kilometers traveled, some benefits related to reduction of greenhouse gas and emissions, and then a commensurate increase in walking, cycling, and transit use. The report covers some of those pieces and references that document if that's of further interest to folks. We did a little bit of a look at other cities. We focused on the member pickup and drop off, which we have today, versus the free floating model, which again, I think the speaker referenced pretty appropriately, in that you would pick it up from its existing space on the street and you could take it to any other space in the city. That's currently the model that the company Car2Go uses in the city right now, and the pilot would be to expand their ability to park in more locations than they can now without penalty. So we looked at Calgary, Vancouver, Seattle, and DC. We looked at what kinds of existing permitted parking or parking restrictions they had in place, both in the residential and non-residential locations. We looked at fees that were charged, which were anywhere from $64.76 at the low end up to about $3,000 at the higher end. And then some of the other sort of unique components of those programs, some trying to gain some parity about on-street versus off-street spaces. Again, some having a cap on the number of operators and a cap on the number of permitted spaces as we've proposed. And then other implications of what existing rules and enforcement components still apply. So those we use to really help us kind of frame up this policy directive. So the policy and the pilot, what we are proposing is that parking by these free-floating cars would be allowed in residential permit parking locations. They'd be exempted from the 3-hour time limits. That there would be, operators would be responsible for redistribution. So we know that when we have heard that there's frustration when the cars cluster, and we define clustering as more than two or more of any car share vehicle from one operator, that they would be responsible for redistribution of those vehicles, that there'd be a cap. So there would be a cap on 2,000 permits issued under this pilot. We would not exceed that cap. And so the first 4 companies that came through the door would be eligible to participate in the pilot if they were ready to go. We would not increase that to another increment of 500. And we would propose the pilot run from a year, March through April. I think it's really very valuable for us to gather more data and get more consultation with the community about how this can work. We hear really robust arguments on both sides of the equation about people who really want more access and people who are frustrated about impacts to existing parking. We would require the car share organizations to provide us with data on their fleet, their usage, both the origins and destinations, the percentage of the time that each vehicle was used so we could really understand utilization, how many vehicle kilometers were traveled, and then the geographical distribution of members, and then the number of members on a quarterly basis. So were those increasing based on additional access or not? If there was non-compliance, the ultimate enforcement would be we would be able to revoke the permits from that company. So if they were consistently not following the rules that were set out in the pilot, we would be able to revoke their permits and no longer have them operate. And then enforcement, the car share vehicles would still be subject to all parking regulations. So some of the questions that you referred to, Councillor, about parking over driveways or parking inappropriately would still be via enforcement. And then continue to work with police services to enforce that. Some of the issues that we have heard, again, I mentioned clustering of car share vehicles, insufficient enforcement, which goes along with some of this redistribution and rebalancing. Some of the key destinations and special events bring more car share vehicles, which coincidentally are some of the locations where there's very limited on-street parking, and so that's perceived for those special events as being a real impact. And then, as you mentioned also, some of the oversubscribed or waitlisted areas where you have permit parking, people get very agitated about having what they perceive as other people parking on the streets there. So we are proposing a policy for free-floating car share in our report. We are also suggesting that we do additional consultation both with residents and the car share industry, and also I would assume businesses and some of our parking providers about the fees. We've looked at a range of them. We think we've come in at a place that will probably be workable. We think they could range anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 per vehicle, which would generate some additional revenue for the city in the amount of $3 to $4 million based on the 2,000 permits if we had all 4 companies come forward. And then we would do evaluation, both on the collection on complaints, whether compliance enforcement was working as predicted in the in the pilot, and we would conduct a survey about travel behavior and really use this as an opportunity to gain some more data before we were to move forward with a more formal policy directive and program.
Done, very quickly done. We have a question for you from Councillor Doucette.
Thank you very much. That was good because it did answer some of my questions, which I now will not ask. You touched on the main concern I have is permit parking. So I have a map of my permit parked streets. I also, very kindly from Transportation, have a list of the streets which right now have waiting lists. How will we look after the residents who have paid to have a parking spot? I'm talking about street-specific parking, permit parking. Zone, we have a bit more flexibility. So for instance, street-specific, there's 20 spots, 20 permits out there. Right now, we have 4 companies looking at getting involved in this free floating, which I do support. If each of them only parked 1 car on that street, a resident who has paid for street-specific parking will have to find somewhere else to park. Because enforcement is good in my neighborhood, they will get ticketed. They will have to pay that ticket even though they've paid for a permit. My understanding is some of our car share people pay the ticket for their clients. How are we going to protect the residents right now on these waitlisted streets, which Councillor Holliday was asking about? Can we do an exemption and that we would review it every 6 months to see when there is no longer a wait list? How are we going to protect those residents?
Through you, Chair, it's a difficult question. It's one of the issues that we would want to explore through a pilot project. One of the ways to address the situation that you've described, where a person who has a permit on a permit that is valid only for that one street, that perhaps we can have an expedited process to have that ticket canceled in the event that the reason they got their ticket was as a result of a car-to-go or free-floating car share vehicle. But we haven't fully resolved that question. That's just one of the ideas we've floated around, and I think it's one of the things that we would like to understand. What is the level of impact through a pilot project, and can that be managed, and how can we manage it?
So you're saying you'll wait till the pilot project for me to be able to tell you what I can tell you now, how my residents will respond?
Through you, Chair, there are a few issues of concern that have been raised that we don't have an answer to, that we can have an answer through a policy lens, that we want to understand how this would work in practice, to understand what the best way to solve that would be.
What is the percentage of permits sold right now on a street where a temporary parking permit cannot be achieved by someone visiting? What's that percentage right now?
Councillor, the percentage is 90%. So once we're at 90% capacity for the sale of regular term permits, we stop the issuance of temporary permits in order to allow sufficient space for the residents themselves.
So right now, a visitor to a resident on a street, if it's 90%, they cannot get a temporary permit either.
Correct.
Okay. I do like in your report that clustering. So right now, if a company has 2 cars or more on a street, they can do their GPS and they know exactly where all their little cars are, is my understanding. They have to have someone come and move that car, what was it, within 2 hours? Is that 24/7? Or is that only during permit-only time?
I believe it would be at all times, and I'm seeing a nod from my staff. We hadn't discussed that at that point.
So again, if it's 3-hour parking, they have to move the car after 3 hours. If it's 2-hour parking, 1-hour parking.
If there is an issue of clustering taking place. So that is the issue we want to make sure that we are addressing when vehicles are clustered. It doesn't serve the company well, and it certainly doesn't serve the neighborhood well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Davis.
I wanted to ask about the fees. We don't have any fee structure here at all, and in fact, we won't see it until the budget process. And I'm struggling with this. How do we make a decision about whether to proceed if we don't have the basic financial information about the revenue, and the amount of money we're going to make out of this?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think that our proposal focuses really on the policy specifically with the budget and the fees, we need to do further consultation to hit that right fee. And so I don't remember if the report identifies whether, given the outcome of the budgeting process, there'd be the ability to move forward or cancel the pilot at that point, to move forward if there
Well,
was not a viable outcome from the budget process. But we do believe we need to do further consultation on the fees before
But I
making any
think the
statement
question
on
of
that.
whether the city is going to be able to add additional enforcement, add the additional costs associated with implementation, and how much money, how much revenue will be generated, we don't know that until the fees are set. But that's just one of them. That's why I think it's premature what we have before us, and I don't know that we have sufficient information.
If I may, Councillor, what we're asking for in this report is that the policy for free floating car share be adopted, and that we be directed to consult, to undertake consultation about the fee.
No, but
and
they're
that the
connected.
actual introduction of a pilot wouldn't be approved until after the budget process actually approved it. So we're
Right,
not
but
asking you
those
to
two are
approve a
connected
pilot
as
today.
far as I'm concerned.
It is a staged process, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, okay. The second thing, do we know anything about the profit of these companies? How much are they making on our streets, using our streets? No. I know when we introduced the sign bylaw and the sign fee, we had some information, we're doing more, about the kind of profit that's being generated. We don't have any information. It assumes there will be, this report assumes there will be a certain redistribution expected. How are you enforcing that? What levers do you have to enforce that?
Through you, Madam Chair, so currently, and we would expect that the company would have provisions to do rebalancing, and they typically have teams of what they believe is an adequate number of folks to redistribute those vehicles. If they continue to cluster on streets and they don't move them, we can revoke their permits.
But
That's
at
the
what
ultimate.
point, are there thresholds, or how are you measuring? I mean, one of the things is right now, they could not redistribute, and so they just said, we'll leave them and we'll risk the tickets. So what's the difference now? Why wouldn't they just risk the tickets and pay tickets?
And I think currently they pay tickets in locations where they are, it's identified by either a resident or someone else that they don't want them parking on that street, perhaps in some of those permit parking areas. And so I also think that there is a time, the company would need to be able to staff up appropriately to be able to respond in a timely fashion to that clustering issue if they wanted it to be a successful program moving forward. So I think if that was their interest, then they would have some incentive to staff up appropriately for that redistribution.
But there's nothing to enforce other than revocation.
Just if they violate the law, they would get a ticket like any other, and if they were continuing to not comply with the terms of the pilot on clustering continuously, we would revoke their permits and their ability to participate in the pilot.
Okay. The other thing is that it identifies that there are problem areas like Exhibition Place and others. What are you recommending to prevent and solve those congestion-type problems in those areas?
Those are, through you, those are some of the issues. We've actually identified them up front
Right.
as issues that need to really be identified and managed through the pilot project. We don't have any great options for restriction, because the whole idea is that would we see an uptick in free-floating car share use and therefore a commensurate reduction in people either giving up a car or having no need for a second car. And so there is a concern that having restrictions on where people can park their car share vehicles is impacting their ability to use the system. And so we really need to test it sort of broadly without restrictions to see what the outcomes would be. We fully understand that there are some areas of the city where there are special event sort of problems that occur where a lot of people cluster, and that there are very significant concerns from residents about that. And so I think through the pilot, we would be looking to manage that through enforcement. If we had to work collaboratively with the police to understand what we could do with regard to focused enforcement in that location, we could
But
certainly do
how
that.
could you deal with enforcement when they have a right to park there?
The clustering issue would still be around against the terms of the pilot, so they wouldn't have that right to cluster. So that if it's one vehicle.
There's no
which one?
ability to enforce it. How are you going to, first of all, define what is clustering?
We've defined clustering in the report as more than one vehicle from a certain company on any given street.
Okay, how did I miss that? And so what will happen? It's 4:13.
Oh, we can't see this clock from here. We can't see it from here.
Oh,
We're behind them.
the clocks aren't working.
So just to clarify, so these cars will only be allowed to park on streets that have permit parking? Is that correct?
Yes.
Through you, they'll be allowed to park on any street. Excuse me? Where parking is permitted. It's like waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? Got your attention.
So on streets where, because in my area, I have streets that there's no permit parking, people kind of know where their parking spots are. If there's one of those cars parked there that goes over 3 hours, because that's how people usually park, it'll be ticketed or...
You're absolutely right, Councillor. It would still need to comply with the terms of the parking in that location. In the case of permit parking streets, it would have a permit to park on those streets.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Well, there's just an issue with the mics here.
Could we just get clarification? Sorry, the council asked a question where they could park only in permitted areas, and one said yes, one said no, and then you said anywhere people can park. Is that permitted areas? Thank you. Just wanted to clarify.
Okay, other questions from the committee? Seeing none, Councillor Holiday, I'm sorry. You did say you would like to ask questions. Go ahead.
So just to be really crisp on that point, this is really important. In a ward where there is no permit parking right now, it's only covered by the 3-hour bylaw. Will Car2Go be allowed to park for more than 3 hours under this scheme?
No, those vehicles would still need to comply with the parking regulations on that street. So if it's a 3-hour restriction, they would have to comply with 3-hour restriction.
So the change to the bylaw alludes to relief from the 3-hour restriction. Can you explain how that interfaces with the other changes to, I think it's Chapter 925 regarding permits? I need to be really crisp on this because it was a question. Then I have some other stuff I wanted to ask.
Go ahead.
Naz or Vince, did you want to speak in terms of the technical modifications to the bylaw?
Sure. So basically, they are exempt from the 3-hour limit only in permit parking areas.
Okay.
In all other areas, they have to comply with the bylaw regulations that are in place.
Got it.
If they're in a paint display area and they have to pay a fee just like anyone else.
Okay. So my other question, it's something I brought up the last time this came to the committee. I wanted to understand a little bit better. If I rent a car, not a car sharing car, but if I rent a car and I want to go home for the night and there's permit parking on my street, what do? I get a temporary permit, right? Okay. So can you explain to me, how do I get a temporary permit and what does it cost?
If the street is designated under the permit parking program and you don't own a car, but you have a history of renting vehicles, what we do to accommodate those residents is that, they would apply for a regular term parking permit, the most inexpensive permit that we have, 6-month terms. They would present their driver's license, and they would also present a history of their rental vehicles from the rental company.
Okay.
We would provide them with a permit that says rental auto. This way they could move that permit from one rental vehicle to another.
Okay. What if I'm more casual than that? Like, what do I do to get a temporary permit? I know it's a process out there, but I just want to make a point in the committee with it.
So,
Do you go online or phone it in?
you would go online, access 24/7. You key in the address of the property. If there's space available, you're able to purchase a permit for 1 day, 2 days, or 1 week periods.
What does it cost?
Or
does it vary? If it varies, that's okay.
Yeah. So for a 1-day permit, we're looking at $9.23. A 2-day permit, $13.85. And a 1-week permit, $21.63.
Okay, so I guess the last question, from a from a government to business perspective or an economic development perspective, is there any opportunity for us to interface a little bit better with businesses that have the need for temporary parking? One of those businesses could be a car sharing company. I would recognize that it's probably cumbersome to phone in a car when you've got a fleet. Every time you need to have an on-the-spot need to park overnight. Is there room in the system to move the bar a little bit forward, to have an online system or a direct interface with one of these companies so that they could purchase temporary permits as the need comes up and maybe even transfer them within the day so that they're not paying twice for the same car? But do we have some room with a little bit of thought or development? Is there technology out there maybe?
Just to clarify, Councillor, are you speaking about temporary permits for streets under the permit parking program or temporary permits for all streets in the city?
Temporary streets under the parking permit program.
Okay, so we have an online system now with that 24/7 access. Car share members, they themselves can purchase the permits if they decide to keep these short-term rentals that they have. If they decide to bring it home with them, keep it overnight, they have the ability now to do it.
Okay.
What we find is normally these short-term rentals, folks are not bringing them home through car share companies. If they're going to budget rent a car or enterprise, yes, occasionally they will bring it home for weekend use, for example, and they have this 24 system at their disposal, and they are using it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I've got a question for you. Sure. It doesn't matter. You go ahead.
Just to crisp it up a touch. So I take one of these cars and I go and I park it in front of Councillor Holliday's, now Deputy Mayor Holliday's house. And it's got three-hour parking, right? So I leave the car there. And I go visit his neighbor because we're having a party next door. And 3 hours go by. Now he's getting really annoyed, right? Nobody else has come to pick up the car because nobody else has needed it. So it sits there for those 3 hours and then beyond, right? So now he calls parking enforcement, right? So parking enforcement comes out 2 hours later and marks the tires on that car, right? Then supposedly they're supposed to come back 3 hours later to see if the car's moved at all, right? Okay. So let's say the car hasn't moved. It's sat there now for 8 hours, right, on a 3-hour limit. So now they issue that car a ticket, correct? Okay. So I'm assuming that the company then passes it back on to me as the last user of that car, right? No? Can't, right? Oh, okay. So they just kind of like sort of accumulate those tickets and then they negotiate them with us at some point, like the courier companies do at the end of the day, right? They'll say, look, I got $100,000 worth of tickets, but you know what? Court time, legal time, officer time, everyone else's time. So we'll go like, 10% on this and we'll settle this for like, just maybe you can add a little crispness to that scenario on what happens there.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think this is a similar challenge, even if it wasn't a car share vehicle, about the time that it takes to get enforcement to happen, and so that's always going to be a challenge, I think. We had sort of kicked around the idea of having the ability to have the person who was going to lodge the complaint, in this case, Councillor Holladay, to call the car share company directly so they could get out and rebalance it and meet their terms in terms of rebalancing within a 2-hour time frame. But my understanding is that currently Car2Go is paying the full price of the tickets that their members are are gathering from parking in places where there is existing permit parking. I don't know for sure all the details of that, but that's my.
Well, anyway, that really wasn't the real part of the question. I'm just kind of trying to understand, trying to make it a little crisper, that's all. So I go out and I take one of these cars and I go to I'm late for a Blue Jay game. Right? And then I sort of leave it on the side of the road on Blue Jay Way. What happens in that case? Like, where I'm not supposed to leave it, but because it's not my car, and because I don't really care if it gets towed or if it gets ticketed, I say, oh, okay, too bad, so sad, right? I'm late for the game, so I'm just going to the game, right? What happens then?
There's a few options that could happen through your chair. The car could get ticketed and towed, or the car share company could be able to know through their systems that that vehicle is in a place that shouldn't be, and they'll rebalance it. Or somebody else could come along and.
So what are the ramifications for me for leaving a car there where it has the potential to be ticketed and towed? Like what happens? They just cancel my membership or something?
I think they could take any number of I don't know specifically what each car share company has in terms of their policies. I know that if you, in some of like an enterprise car share, if you bring your vehicle back late, for example, you're charged a fee on top of that. So I assume there's some framework of fees for various sort of scofflaw activities up and including at some point revoking membership. But I don't know that for sure. But I know that for enterprise car share.
So there would be a penalty to me, or could potentially be a penalty to me. Like, let's say that I would have to pay the car towing, storage, and parking, but the city might not necessarily recoup all that money, right? Some of that money may actually stay with the company, because they may, at the end of the day, sit down and negotiate with us, right? Because once they've accumulated a whole bunch of these charges, it becomes complicated in terms of collections, right? As with all things, right?
Through you, Madam Chair, I mean, yes, it's complicated, but my understanding is they are acquiring or amassing tickets, and then they're paying those penalties on a monthly basis.
But all of those
And I
things
don't-
of those things could happen, right?
I can't really answer that. I don't know the answer.
Just to add a little clarity to it.
Thank you for that crispness.
For that level of
I'm going to
clarity.
ask a couple questions. So you've got a great chart slide here that talks about benefits, and I'm wondering about that. So my understanding is this is part and parcel of the shared economy, which everybody's talking about this day. It's got traction. We're there. But what I see from the benefits of this is that it reduces vehicle ownership. It reduces household costs. It reduces vehicles and kilometers traveled. It reduces greenhouse gases and emissions, and it increases walking, cycling, and transit users, which many of our colleagues are talking about all the time in this city, that we need to do more of that, and this actually increases that. Why does this increase that? Walking, cycling, and transit use.
Through you, Madam Chair, I can speak to the general concept of that, and I'll just use myself as an example. I think when people purchase a vehicle, they pay a pretty hefty upfront cost, and so they then don't necessarily think as much about the number of times they're going to use it. It also sits idle for a good chunk of most of their day, whether they're at work or where have you overnight. And so part of the issue is that people who choose to use car share for some or most of their trips often tend to be more significant users of transit, walking, and cycling. I think that we've seen in the cities that others have studied to look at the sort of outcomes of this, that they've seen an increase amongst members, not only of sort of a reduction in vehicles or the interest or willingness not to purchase a second vehicle, but also a more robust use of walking, transit, and cycling for more of their trips. And I think that's something that we would absolutely look at what the Toronto version of that is as well as part of this pilot. So we would want to look at members, and we would want to identify what their other trips were as well.
Okay, and this trend, this is a trend, and this has been actually implemented as per your slideshow here in a number of other cities, and it's worked. That's correct. It's their best practices. And
through you, I mean, I think that the other cities, we've looked at only 4 of them. We tried to focus our review on cities in Canada and then ones that had sort of robust or more longevity in their car sharing programs. I think we have seen that, especially in some of the denser neighborhoods where parking is restricted, there are a lot more people who are joining car share companies. They use it, sort of the concept of mobility as a service. Depending on what trip you want to be taking, you make the decision as to what's the most convenient way for you to get there, and car share has, I think, played into a very robust transportation economy in those cities that we've examined, and others that we haven't looked at as well.
So ultimately, this also will assist with congestion and gridlock. It will promote different types of transportation modes, uses, etc., and overall probably contribute to a healthier city overall.
That's what we are finding when we look at sort of the suite of tools that go beyond just owning your own vehicle, that the ability to have some choices and options mean that you might be more likely to walk, cycle, or take transit for your trip, which ultimately is going to take 1 or more cars off the road. I think there's counter arguments to that as well, but I would suggest that that is what the studies have shown, is that there's a more robust use of transit, walking, and cycling. I also think as we look at the supply side of parking, especially in some of our denser buildings and denser neighborhoods, that there is a huge growth factor and less ability for people to store their own personal vehicles, which make it really an opportunity for them to be able to live in some of our denser neighborhoods without actually having to own and store a car.
Well, that's an excellent point, because that's where a problem. Intensification is a mounting problem in the city, so that's actually interesting. Thank you for that. I'm just going to quickly ask a question for Councillor Carmichael Greb. The neighborhoods that we represent, there is parking regulations related to the subway use, and so her question was related to that. In different times, it might be 1 hour or less or more. How would that impact those streets, whether they've got parking regulations to control and mitigate that?
Free-floating car share companies would need to comply with the regulations on the street unless there is a residential permit parking, in which case they would comply with residential parking permit standards.
Okay, that concludes our questions. We're going to move to speakers. Is there any visitors that would like to speak? Councillor Perks, what a surprise. Okay, you can go first and followed by Councillor Doucette.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The issue of these floating car rentals, and I want to be very clear, this is rental. You know, as I don't teach my kids that sharing means letting one of the other kids use their toy for a price. This is someone who owns an asset and charges for the use of it. So it's car rental. Let's be clear about that. There are a number of issues identified in the staff report on this short-term car rental issue, and a couple that were left out that I think we need to do a little bit more work on. The staff report identifies 3 issues that they hope they'll be able to work out during the pilot for this. One of them being the fact that occasionally you get large bunches of cars on particular streets. Another being that there are some areas where already people who want a parking permit are waitlisted. And the third being specifically the Canadian National Exhibition, but I think more largely we should think in terms of special events. And I want to speak to those quickly, and then whether or not we're in a position where we can move forward, and then give some couple of thoughts on a few more pieces that are missing. So in terms of special events, at the CNE, for example, because everyone in the whole region tries to drive into South Parkdale all at once during the X, we have a regulation there that says only people who are residential permit holders can park there. The 3-hour rule does not apply, because otherwise people would not be able to get home. Staff acknowledge that they don't know how this short-term car rental proposal will work there. They say they'll work it out during the pilot. Similarly, many of us have zones in our wards where people are currently waitlisted. In good faith, they've been waiting for an opportunity to get a parking permit. This will allow people to queue jump and offer no recourse to people who currently can't park anywhere near their home at all. Third, there's the issue of the many cars in one place, and there's a hope that somehow we'll be able to deal with it. But if you look, the only data we get from the short-term car rental companies is quarterly. And so maybe there'll be a complaint basis. I can tell you right now that when a constituent of mine phones 311 to say there's a problem with overparking on my street, it is not dealt with within 2 hours. It's 2 hours before the parking staff are notified, and if they have staff available, then they might go. I would feel more sanguine about the possibility of dealing with these during the pilot if it wasn't for the record of the major short-term car rental company in the city of Toronto. Car2Go is a scofflaw company. Right now, they routinely violate our parking regulations and encourage their customers to violate those regulations by parking where they are not allowed to. Every single day, Car2Go is encouraging Torontonians to break the law. How on earth should I think we're going to come to an accommodation solving the special event problem, the problem where there are not enough parking spaces for the existing residents, and the problem of enforcement? Frankly, staff has to go back and give me answers on those questions before I'm prepared to open this public resource to this scofflaw company. Finally, there are some questions that are simply not dealt with. The first is there's no assessment of what other parking options are available. I know that when I do work with a condominium application in my ward, we make an arrangement for car sharing and bike sharing spaces there. Similarly, I have a fairly healthy store of streets where there is available parking. We could be providing dedicated spaces. And finally, we have yet to get any advice on what are the legal options for the City of Toronto when a firm deliberately breaks our parking laws. It applies in this issue, and perhaps more importantly, it applies also with delivery vehicles and postal trucks and all that stuff. There's not been enough work done here. I think before we go ahead with this pilot, and the short-term rentals may be a benefit, but before we go ahead and change what we all know is a very difficult set of regulations just to benefit one private company or perhaps two, we need better answers on those questions. So I would urge you to send it back to staff and ask for more clarity on those 4 or 5 key issues before we make this commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doucette.
Thank you very much. The last 4 words in this report are "and identify possible solutions." But I agree with Councillor Perks, there's a lot more questions in this report than there are solutions. I do support car share. I think it is great. And from talking to residents, since being able to drop the car in front of your house has been allowed by the company, residents have supported this. We have, though, gone through the hiccup when a particular company cancelled their licensing agreement with our green P, and therefore the cars weren't in the green P lots. I was having 5, 6, 7 cars parked on one street. I complained. The company responded, and now we were down to maybe 2 or 3 cars on a street. So they did respond to that. But I do agree we can't have clumping. Whether it's a permitted street or whether it's 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, everyone must abide by the rules. My residents have been most upset how a company can come in and just ignore the rules. I do agree with Councillor Perks on that. My concern in my ward, as I showed everyone, which I know it's small, I can always blow it up if you want, is where we have permit parking in my ward. We have zones. One of them is at 95% right now, but I have several streets which have waiting lists. And several of these streets are dead-end streets. So if they can't find a spot on there, they can't park on Jane Street because there's no permit parking overnight. Where would they park? And wherever they do park, because it's street-specific, they will get a ticket. I heard that we could ask them to go and then fight the ticket, but why should they? They have paid to have a spot somewhere on their street to park their car. And we have 4 companies in a pilot, possibly 5 when this does go ahead, who could have 5 extra cars parked on that street. And I have a waiting list. So I think we have to look at this in a bigger picture I do support the idea of this floating permit. I think it will help our residents. I think over years, it will reduce the number of car owners, because if they don't need their car really during the week, only want one on weekend, these cars are great. Believe me, they're zipping around my ward all over the place. We have many car share individual spots in our parking lots. Like Councillor Perks, whenever a development comes in, we make them have car share on site. Those are great. But we also heard that if a street is 90% permitted already, a resident living there cannot get a temporary permit either. And then these companies would be allowed to come in as well. So it's a balancing act. Again, I do believe that these car share companies will reduce ownership of cars, which will relieve our streets of permanent parking on specific streets. It's this grey area while we're getting there where I think we do need a few more rules and regulations before we put this pilot out there. We should be looking after the residents right now who have been abiding by the rules. They do buy their permit. They renew it every year. It costs them $280-something each year. You get tickets, they're going to add up really quickly. So I would like to see some of these concerns and problems solved before it goes out to the pilot. I will support a pilot because I do like it. It will help support reduce greenhouse gases. It will encourage people to, maybe it won't encourage them to use TTC because they'll have a car right outside their door. But anyway, it will reduce our greenhouse gases and it will give other people options. I know one particular car share, I have over 1,000 members in my ward. I respect that and I respect them. But I have 56,000 residents I have to take into consideration. So therefore, I think we need a few more stipulations, few more rules of issues which come to councillors. We can help you staff by telling you what the outcome will be immediately for that pilot. Let's get this pilot so it works, so residents can support it, so at the end of the pilot we can actually move forward and make this work. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and for bringing this report forward. I think that it was a letter now 3 or 4 years ago that came to Public Works about initiating this work, and then it went silent, it went dark, whatever you want to call, when it just sort of disappears. It got stuck in the wheels of change. And I know what part of the reason was, because the group that was lobbying strongest for this came back to me and said, well, why aren't you driving this more? Why aren't you pushing it again, Councillor Layton? And I told them, I'm actually a member. And I was looking at my app because I was looking for a car, and all of a sudden a little button came up and said, call your local councillor to ask for the change to happen. And this was after they were already encouraging people to park on the roads. And I told the company, I said, this Uber approach to policy change doesn't jive with me. So I said, I'm not taking the next step. If you can find someone, that's quite good, but because of the approach that was taken to the change, I would not be supportive of it. Now, be supportive of me being the one pushing the boulder up the hill. Having said that, and respectfully to my colleagues with whom I have the deepest loyalty and respect for, I think I'm the only car share member on council. I was trying to do the math. If someone else can figure out if they are, because I know that Councillor Cressy doesn't own a car, Councillor Perks can't drive a car, and not because he had the license removed. He never had a license in the first place, which is fine. Just to clarify. But I'm the only other councillor that doesn't own I believe that doesn't own a car. And so I would be the only one that logically would be a member. And I'm not only a member of one service, I'm actually a member of a couple, because that makes sense to my family. Because when we go on trips and we need a space for a car seat, when we need it for a certain predetermined amount of time, we need to go to IKEA, we need to do all of the above, car-to-go doesn't work. The roaming spot doesn't work because the cars are too small. So what do? I book my car through my app, I go, I take it, I go do my trip, and everything's fine. I put the car seat in. I had an empty parking spot. The city wouldn't let me convert to a painting studio for my wife. And then, so I approached CarShare and said, hey, wait a second, I got this empty spot. Can you put a car there? And they said no, because we don't allow private operators of parking lots in residential districts. So we've also been exploring this because Green P could do that, which would offer up a whole lot of more of permanent spots in neighborhoods for that service. But there is this other service with the roaming spots. And I can appreciate that some people do depend on the spots in front of their houses with a permit. I feel that. I get the calls like Councillor Doucette does, like Councillor Perks does. When there's an event at Christie Pitts, when the Santa Claus parade comes, there you cannot find a parking spot. I believe that. I do. But they're not the only residents that live on those streets, and they're not the only people that have a right to, on occasion, park there. I was really worried the pushback that we would get when we initially started discussing this 4 years ago. I was nervous. Like, I was really, really nervous about putting this forward because the permit parking calls come frequently. But as the company started allowing their cars to be parked illegally, where I thought we would get calls, the calls didn't come. They didn't. I've never seen a grouping of more than 3 car-to-goes in a single spot. And I live in the ward with apparently, according to the company, the highest number of car share users and members in this particular service. So I'm at least of the position that I'd be comfortable proceeding with the program, the pilot, should some of these concerns that have been brought up be able to be identified within the early stages of the pilot and resolved, and those being the oversubscription zones. I know the technology can do it. If we're being told they can't, someone's trying to hide something from us, because it totally can. And then this notion of special events. They could build a technology, build into their technology a way of restricting zones at certain times. It could happen. I know it can happen. I've used the app enough to realize that they know if you're parked in a space you're not supposed to be parked in. They know exactly where you're parked. When you're trying to turn off your service and say, no, I'm no longer on it, if you're 5 meters out of their parking lot, or formerly when they did the parking lot. So I know they can do it, and we should demand that they address these issues before we proceed. If it takes a deferral, I can appreciate that staff might need that time. If it doesn't, and we could have every assurance that it could proceed with these 2 conditions, I would be quite happy to support the pilot moving ahead at a faster rate. Again, I'll say, though, that this is about people having equal access to space on our streets. And just because I don't own a car doesn't mean I don't have a right to a little bit of space on occasion. There are some concerns, and I think we can address them very specifically, but we shouldn't be afraid to look at this. And it relates to the point that I know that one of my motions that have been added about drop bikes, if you haven't, Google it. It's super cool technology, and it's going to have a similar discussion like as this car sharing one does.
Thank you. I have been struggling with this question as well, because I do believe that car sharing does serve a number of families and communities, and particularly people who have excellent access to transit and use this to fill in the gaps. However, I'm not comfortable with the amount of information we have here, and in particular, I'm not comfortable that we don't have the fee structure or potential fee structure and revenue picture from this program. It is not going to come until the budget process. And to me, this is always a trade-off. One of the benefits of this will be, does it generate sufficient revenue to make it worthwhile in terms of covering the cost of administration and covering the cost of enforcement? And we have no information about that. And we know you start a pilot project, it's very hard to roll it back. We think it's been hard to resist the lobbying that's been done on this up until this point. Good luck at the end of the pilot project. So I too am concerned in those areas that are heavily subscribed that we will push people who are paying $200 a year out, or actually $400 a year out, and we'll get tickets that will end up our offices having to resolve, because that's what happens. I got a ticket, they call our offices. So I'm concerned about that. And the reason I want to focus on the fees is we have fees for road occupation now. We have road occupation fees, which we just doubled or more last year, and we're talking about increasing even more. We have parking fees. If you want to park on the street that are set around the city, both of those far exceed what I think is being discussed here as a potential revenue generator. I want to see those numbers. And I want to understand how we compare using our public roads for private purposes. I mean, these are for-profit corporations, and what the benefits are to the city. What I know is in my ward, for the people who are paying their permit fees, there'll be no benefits to them. Already, the enforcement that takes place in just the Toronto and East York District makes the people who have permits susceptible to higher levels of enforcement than those that don't have permit parking. And I'll just, complain a bit about what is happening now. Those areas that don't have permit parking have virtually no enforcement. So they park on the street for free anyway. So I think actually, if there is going to be car-to-go, free floating, it should be free floating across the whole city. And there should be permit parking across the whole city. You want to park on the street, you pay. That's the rules. You park on the street, you pay. But right now what we have is just a mixed bag of unfair rules, and this will worsen it because now the same areas that are enforced heavily and pay to park on the public streets will now be inconvenienced more by potentially being pushed out of the public spaces that are available now. So I think we need to put some more thought into both the fee structure and to understand how to deal with the problems that are identified on the last page before we proceed with a pilot project.
Committee, Councillor Mamalady.
So
We left that.
we finished that already. Why is it that every time I speak, he feels compelled to take up my time?
I'm gonna restart the clock.
I really appreciate that.
Add 10, 15 seconds to it, please. I feel better about that.
So there's a whole slew of things that I'd like to talk about here, because I don't think it's just about this particular proposal that's driving people nuts. It's not driving me nuts, by the way. I'll be supporting it because it's refreshing, actually, that we're dealing with an issue of car for a change and not an issue of getting rid of the car. That the war on the car, at least for this hour or two, doesn't exist, or maybe it does. Maybe some of the arguments we are hearing from those that have permits on their streets in the downtown part of the city is really the objective of getting rid of the car. And that might be the reason that the same people don't want this particular ride-share program to exist. One, they have the benefit, when I say they, I mean those that have those permits on those small streets downtown. They have the benefit of living in the downtown part of the city. They have the benefit of complaining about everybody else's car that seems to be taking up streets like King Street and, in the way of some bicycle lanes on some of the other streets like Bloor. Those same people complain about the car regularly, but yet they have a parking spot in front of their house, and they pay a permit for that. My view is nobody should be paying any permit fees for parking in this city on city streets. My view is those areas of the downtown part of the city should be exempt from paying anything. First come, first serve. If you don't get home on time on your street, then you shouldn't have a parking spot waiting for you in front of your house. It's the same house that people don't want the rest of everybody else's car in the downtown part of the city. It makes me sick. It's so hypocritical. Maybe one day somebody like myself will get away with doing away with permit parking completely in this city, because I think it's ridiculous. It's just a way to secure somebody a parking spot in front of their house in the downtown part of the city. The reason I like this is because like Councillor Layton, there are a lot of other people that work every day and don't necessarily own a car, and perhaps are even riding a bike. And I see that the more we entertain the car share programs, the more that might be reversed. So the person who doesn't necessarily respect the car might want to rent a car once in a while and garnish a little bit of respect for the car. So this war on the car might end eventually. I don't know whether I'd bet on that or not, but I think these kinds of programs, if anything, start people talking about how to move around the city a little quicker, and might end that particular chapter. I don't know. I like the concept because it's somebody else paying the fee as well. So I think I got that right, that this particular company is now saying, we would like the rights to this, but we're also going to be paying you the fees so that our drivers don't necessarily have to worry about that. They build in their component on their drivers, so they make their money back with the drivers. I kind of like that, and that's a little different than some of the others that are out there. Some of the others have managed to get parking spots in some of the high-rise buildings. They got their parking spots kind of secured in the first level there, or the basements, or wherever they have them. In this particular case, I think they deserve to use the roads to park like anybody else. And I, you know, maybe in another era, I will argue that someone's property, like mine, has the same right to be on the same roads than anybody who wants to sleep on our streets, anybody who wants to pitch a tent on the streets, anybody who wants to put their possessions on our sidewalks. We tell them that they can do it because it's public property. But yet when it comes to these kinds of ventures, we have to make sure that the person who owns that car has to pay. So I'm not going to take that up yet because I think it's a bit far-fetched, but at the end of the day, I've made my point. If people can use the streets for other things, if they can use them to sleep, they can use them to ask people for money regularly, or ask them if they can clean their windshields and use our mediums to do that and hang around and with signs, then why are we so adamant on getting rid of the car that gets people to work and back in the city of Toronto? Because most people will use it exactly for that. It's good, I think, for those that live in the suburbs that may not have a car and might want to come back and forth to work without having to use the subway. A lot of people don't like public transportation. So I kind of like this model. I'll be supporting it for all the reasons that I've suggested. And maybe one day I might stand up in council and try and get rid of permit parking completely in this city, so nobody has to pay for parking and everybody has the right to the same road and use the same road and not have to worry about tickets because of somebody that secured it with a permit.
Thank you, Councillor Mamalady. I think, did you? Oh, that's good to know. Who would like to speak next? Would you, Councillor Holladay? You go, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a motion. If I could ask the clerks to put that on the screen, I'll present that first. It's requesting a report back from the general manager, really with some details and some opportunities that might be in the temporary parking permit system, and maybe see if there's a better way to interface with the car share companies. I'm not going to support the report going forward. Staff did a very good job at answering the question they were asked. They were asked the how. They weren't asked the if, which is the public policy question. So I tore the 2 pages out of the presentation. There's the benefits of car sharing. And by the way, it's the benefits of car sharing, not free-floating permits. And the possible issues and concerns, and I guess the pages weigh the same, but they don't weigh the same in terms of issues for me and opportunities. And the one that stands out on the possible issues is the oversubscribed permit areas and streets. And this is left over from the last time we talked about this at Pewick, I don't know, about a year and a half ago. And the warning from staff at that point in time was, we've got these oversubscribed areas, people will come home, they won't get a chance to park their car because potentially it's filled with a visitor. And we don't give temporary permits in those areas because they're full. People got to live their lives, they got to come home from work, and I think not being able to find a parking spot at the end of a long day of work or whenever you come home, if it's 3 a.m. or whatever it is, I mean, that is a complete upset of the balance of one's life. And so we've got an interesting company with a really interesting transportation model. I think it presents opportunities for the city, but a very practical issue about how do we exclude those neighborhoods that are oversubscribed. And I think the answer to me really is to use the system that we've got right now. We've got this way that you can park a car overnight if you're a visitor, whether it's the person that drove the car or it's the company, whomever, pay that temporary permit. And you won't be given the temporary permit if there's no room in the area. But I guess right now it's a cumbersome system. You've got to call it in. If that car gets picked up and moved for another short-term rental, then you've bought that permit. Maybe there's a way to reuse it. I don't know. But to me, this is kind of an economic development issue. You've got a business with an interesting model, an interesting opportunity in the City of Toronto, an interesting way to achieve some of these benefits of car sharing. But I think we've got to find a way to make it work better with them. And so I guess as a backstop, if this report is passed, I'm going to add this additional reporting. But to sum it up, I'm not comfortable with this. I'm not comfortable with that one issue about the oversubscribed areas, and I can't support it at this point in time.
Okay. Is there anybody else who wants to speak? Because I'm going to speak. Councillor Perruzza, go ahead.
Sure. I guess I'm going to support this, and I'm going to support it just simply because as I've been reflecting on it, I mean, this is, I go out and I rent a car. I go to the airport. It doesn't have it doesn't have a special logo on the side of it. It's nondescript. Nobody knows it's a rental car. And I can go and leave it in front of Councillor Doucette's house. If there's parking on the street in front of Councillor Doucette's house, she wouldn't know unless it has a logo like To Go or whatever it is. It's just a rental. It's a rental agreement, just technology made easier. And I guess we haven't heard from Hertz, or we haven't heard from some of the other rental companies about how this may impact their business and what some of the differences are. And I believe that these companies, when somebody rents a car that way, should be subject to the same rules everyone else is subject to everywhere else. If there's a paid parking spot, you park, you pay parking. If there's a 3-hour parking spot available, you should go and pay your 3-hour parking spot. I understand they want some they want some privileges beyond those companies that put a rental car on the side of their car. Like, I don't know, I'm just picking on Hertz because I don't know any others. I can't remember any other car rental companies now. But so I guess if Hertz put a Hertz rental car to go on their thing and came down and applied for some permits, and then I'm assuming they would be treated very much in the same way as cars to go, and they might be able to get some permits. So really, I'm not confused by this. I don't think I'm confused. I think that the word sharing, I think technology now allows us to use some words a little more loosely. I think it's a car rental operation made slightly easier because you can kind of like leave it everywhere, and you don't need a person to go and to sign in a leasing agreement with or any of those things. It's just you use some technology to access the car and be able to kind of rent it on the spot, as it were, and rent it in the same way that you're able to rent other cars and other vehicles. So I'm going to support it because I think it has merit from that perspective. And if it's the ability to rent a car, made easier, then we should be looking at that. In the same way that, the last time I rented a car from, I don't know if it was Hertz or not, but I parked it and I paid for parking, and then I moved it around. I moved in, and then I just had to bring it back to the airport. I guess that was the real big difference. Is I went to the airport, rented it there. The agreement was worked out there. I picked up the car there. It was nice and clean, by the way, because you clean it after every rental. So I don't know if you're going to get that in the same way as you get these other cars on the street. I brought it back. I didn't have to clean it. I am assuming they cleaned it for the next person, but I had to bring it back to the airport. So the difference from my perspective is now I wouldn't need to do all of that. I could just simply do it in front of Councillor Doucette's house, right? I could go there and 3 hours. I could do it for a period of 3 hours. So I'm picking that up. And I'm hoping that technology will soon evolve where we get our own personal little flying machines, because I'm really tired of having to drive down here from North York. It's a real long drive, and traffic's really bad. Despite all of the mayor's best efforts to move us along really quickly, the roads are all gummed up by a whole bunch of different things, and driving is really heavy these days, especially when you're in a car. It doesn't matter where you go, right? So I'm hoping that we'll be able to have liftoff. I can get liftoff from my front yard and lift on to wherever I got to go in short order. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? No, I'm going to speak quickly. I'm going to move staff recommendations on this item, and I hope you'll support it. I think it's our job as City Council and City Councillors to think about the future of the city, and this is the future of the city. And it's coming whether you like it or not. In fact, it's already here, along with artificial intelligence and automated vehicles. It's all coming, and we need to be ready for it. So this is about sustainability on many levels. It's about the shared economy, which again is here. It's not coming, it's here. And I don't want to label the younger generation, but this is how some of my children and yours eventually will get around our city. And we talk every day, every hour of every day about congestion and gridlock. This will ease that. We've heard that from the experts in the room. We've heard that it's good for the environment, which is also a pressing issue in this city. And it's going to reduce greenhouse gases over the long term in these various presentations that we've had today. And we want to promote different options for transportation and multimodal and getting around from our neighborhoods. So I don't think we can have our heads in the sand. I hope this goes through today, because it's proven again in this presentation that this is a best practice that's being implemented around the globe. And we have on page 10, we have a number of examples of cities that have implemented free-floating programs. Major cities, not small cities, but major cities like our own city. So it's good. It's really good on every level in my mind. The environment, congestion and gridlock, it's the way forward, it's the future, it's shared economy. And lastly, I just want to point out the comments today I've heard on the pilot. I'm finding them a bit hard to swallow, because the Bloor bike lanes, we ran ahead with that pilot, and there was all sorts of things that were not clear. I asked for a supplementary report, which became an international news item, God forbid. And then I'm hearing from my colleagues today that there's not enough, this is not locked down enough, it's not detailed enough. That's what a pilot is. A pilot is a pilot. It's to test the waters and to try it. So if we don't go down this road, I'm not sure why we're going, doing the King Street pilot and the Bloor bike lane pilot, because none of those initiatives have every little bit locked down. And so that's the concept of a pilot. So I hope this body will be big thinkers and think about our future of our city on every level, and how this is one step forward in addressing the very critical problems we face. We need to do something, and this is, in my mind, a step forward. So I will be supporting this wholeheartedly. Yeah.
You brought something up, Madam Chair, that I too am curious about. That pilot project on Bloor Street, the bike lanes, where is that? Is that not supposed to be coming back to us?
Yeah, next month. It's scheduled to come to the October PWIC.
Just wondering when that's, and I just...
That's my understanding.
On
I
a
can't
point of-
confirm that.
I'll say it now and I'll say it again next month. On a point of privilege, I've been asking for the names of all the people that have signed petitions and have ridden along those paths, and nobody's giving me those particular items. So I don't know if it's warranted for me to ask that be a part of next month's report. Nobody's giving me the substantive issues on who's using them. I think that it's the same people that just keep going in a circle just to be counted.
Okay, so if you would like to address that with staff offline, you're welcome to do that, but it's not, the item is not before us. To answer your question, my understanding is it's coming to the next couple PWIC meetings, whether it's October or November. I can't confirm that because I don't have that information, but my understanding is the year is almost up, the pilot, one-year pilot. So I'm sure we'll have a comprehensive report before us shortly. All right, so we're going to vote on this item now. I'll ask for a recorded vote. So we firstly have an amendment courtesy of Councillor Stephen Holliday. So we'll vote on that first. I don't know if we don't need that to be recorded, I don't think. So all those in favor? Would you like to? Okay, sure. Okay, recorded vote.
All those in favor of adopting the motion to amend the item before us, Councillor Holliday, Chair Robinson, Councillor Lee, Councillor Perruzza. All those opposed, Councillor Carmichael Greb and Councillor Mammoliti. That motion carries. On motion to adopt the item as amended, all those in favor, recorded vote is what I'm hearing. Is that right, Chair? Did you request?
Yeah, no, it was requested. Yes, I did request it. You're right. Yeah.
Recorded vote on the item as amended. Councillor Carmichael Greb. Chair Robinson, Councillor Lee, Councillor Mammoliti, Councillor Perruzza. All those opposed, Councillor Holliday. That motion carries. The item is adopted as amended.
Okay, great. We're on to our next item, which is PW 23.10, I believe. If somebody can correct me if I'm correct. Okay, and we do have deputations on this item. We have 35 minutes to lunch, and I think if we work hard here, we can pull us off before lunch and get this all wrapped up. So let's start with our deputants, and our first deputant is Justin Van Det. Welcome, Justin. You know the drill, 5 minutes.
I do.
And you've got your mic on, so you can start now.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I will be under the 5-minute mark. I am here to speak in favor of having the East York logo on the street signs within the former borough of East York. While I appreciate the need for consistency on the design of street signs, I feel it's very important that the city government be doing everything it can to preserve our history, which includes our proud communities and the 6 municipalities that made up metropolitan Toronto. I remember very well back in 1996 during the many debates that were happening about megacity, and there were very passionate debates, but one thing was made very clear, I think, on both sides of the debate was that both sides would do everything that they could to preserve the history of our municipalities. Former municipality logos are cherished symbols that should be celebrated. Displaying our East York logo on East York street signs, as it is today, is a reminder of the proud community that we are within a great city. I would even go one step further, and while it is not before us today, that we should probably be flying the flags of the old respective municipalities of the old cities halls across the old metropolitan Toronto. Signage is part of our community's identity, and I would respectfully ask for the committee's consideration to move an amendment instead of receiving it for information that the city go ahead and have the logos on city street signs in East York. And that wraps up my deputation, Madam Chair.
Any questions? Go ahead.
Thank you for coming, Justin. And the notion of maintaining the East York logo on city property post-amalgamation has already been debated by this council, in particular around the sign at the Civic Center. That call to maintain the sign at the East York Civic Center, that question has resonated through this entire period as well. Would you agree that there is still a real sense of desire to identify where East York is, and that we have a separate sense, a strong sense of identity?
There's definitely a strong sense towards the logo, and a very loud support of the logo. And I know there would be many, many more people down here today if there was an opportunity for them to be part of the discussion where they didn't have to travel such a distance. But people feel very connected and very attached to the logo because it is our former municipality logo. It is, you know, Dawn on sports teams, and so many other community organizations refer and use that logo and look to it very well. I mean, it was displayed very well by the previous East York government. I mean, they did a great job in putting that logo out there and everywhere, wherever they could, and it's something that we should be celebrating and should be cherished.
Along with the City of Toronto.
For sure.
And a
Yes.
recognition that
Yes.
we're part of the City of
Yes.
Toronto. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Frakadakis, do you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Justin, for coming out. And I know you spoke to the East York logo on street signs in the City of Toronto, and I was wondering what your thought is if other former municipalities in the amalgamated city wanted their logo on it. Would you object?
No, I think it should be something that every former municipality should take a little bit of a lead on. That if some of those councillors want to, you know, I know people in Etobicoke are very proud of Etobicoke, and same thing in Scarborough, and of course North York. I still go through North York and I see the logo on the end of their street signs, the city with a heart. And you know, they've made a motto. It's their proud motto, and I think if they want to continue that, they should be allowed to.
And in other neighborhoods in the city, if they wanted their logo, if they say they didn't want, for example, the North York logo on the street sign, but instead wanted their neighborhood's logo, because, you know, there's like lots of neighborhoods in the city. We're a city of neighborhoods. Do you have any objections?
No, I think as you just said, we're a city of neighborhoods, and I think people would be very proud to have that kind of initiative as an option.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor.
Very much. We have another speaker on this item, and our next speaker is Miroslav. Welcome, and there's one, Carol as well after Miroslav. Go ahead.
5 minutes?
5 minutes, you knew that.
It's been a few months. I fully agree with this. It's a sense of pride when for 3 years I used to live in East York, by the East York Town Center, and you see them, you know. Whenever I go anywhere in the world, I do have my Canadian flag on my backpack, the badge, and I still have a little flag of Scarborough on it. I don't know if Etobicoke, York, and North York had a flag or anything, and never lived in those areas. But it's a sense of pride. My driver's license still says Scarborough. My mail delivery still says Scarborough. In the community council, as Councillor Lee can testify, they still put the flag of Scarborough. If I could, I would put the flag of Scarborough in my front yard with the Canadian flag. I still say I am from Scarborough, no matter how many times the city is going to change. Councillor Holiday says he's from Etobicoke. Countless times when I've spoken to you around. Your father said the same thing. The amount of money that may incurs is worth it. We need to have a sense of pride where we're from. I was born in Croatia. I still carry that Croatian. I have a whole bunch of flags because I'm from a lot of countries. We need to have a sense of pride in this city. Other cities, in let's go, Vancouver, I can't remember if it's Vancouver, Victoria, they do the same thing. I will never, when I go international, I say I'm from Toronto because most people don't know Scarborough, Pickering, Whitby, Ajax. But people from all those places are going to say they're from Scarborough, Pickering, and everything else, you know? You have the Canadian flag, the Toronto flag, you know, because we put them, it's a sense of pride. And everybody who I met in East York, we have 10 emails here all from East York and nobody from Scarborough. It could have been a better public consultation on this, but I guarantee you, if you go to Scarborough, outside Scarborough Civic Center, you're going to have people wanting the same thing, you know? It's a sense of pride. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so our next speaker is Carol Burton. Thank you. How are you? So you've got 5 minutes, Carol.
I won't take 5 minutes.
Okay.
My name is Carol Burton Fripp. I'm co-president of the Leaside Property Owners, and Leaside was part of East York for about 30 years, and we enjoyed it. We found it very good government. I've been hearing a lot of comments on various issues this morning about spending money without any return. And we feel that there is, in fact, a return to spending a little bit of money to retain the name of our former municipality on our signs. The value is greater than the cost. The name is important. It's an important part of our history. It's an important part of our heritage. We live in a time where there's an awful lot of discussion about what of the past do we retain and what of the past do we not retain. We feel this is an important part of our current lives, even though there is no East York government anymore. And it leads to a kind of civic pride. I think that it makes people more likely to bond together, not just within East York, but I think knowing the different neighborhoods, the different municipalities is a treasure we should retain. It's not just sentiment, it's something much more important than that, and I urge you to support retaining our East York logo on our street signs. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. And I think that's it. Thank you. So we're going to move to questions of staff. Oh, I'm sorry. You do have one question. Councillor Holiday.
Yes.
Mike would help, I guess. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for speaking to us. I was intrigued. When you sat down, you introduced yourself as being from Leaside.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first thing you said.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't say I'm from East York. And I think about in Etobicoke, where I'm from, and I'm very, very proud of Etobicoke. You come into my office, there's artifacts all over from Etobicoke, including the Etobicoke flag hanging. But there were villages that made up these former municipalities.
True.
Maybe you were from Mimico and then from Etobicoke, or Islington and then from Etobicoke. And then you're from Leaside in North York. How do we rationalize that? How do we have some sort of a system here where we can speak to that? I mean, you identified yourself first as being from Leaside. Would you rather it say Leaside than East York, maybe? Or should it say both? And I'm trying to understand that.
I think East York would do it. I said Leaside because I'm co-president of the local association there, and also because maybe we're a little different from some others, that Leaside was not always part of East York. It was only in relatively recent years, and it was only for 30 years out of the lengthier history of the city. So I have no objection to other municipalities or other neighborhoods either having their identity. But I should echo what the two previous speakers said, that a lot of our mail gets addressed to East York. When you do something on the computer, up pops East York. We had lengthy association with East York, both its associations and its public government and so forth.
Okay.
And we found it very rewarding.
So fair enough to say that the history is complicated and varied. and probably is that way across the city. I mean, you've told me there's a lot of history to that I wouldn't be aware of. So would you advocate to have a sign that said Leaside, East York, and Toronto? Or do you think it should just be sort of stopped at the former municipality level of East York?
I would say that East York would do it. We still have in Leaside, as in fact in other parts of the city, I've noticed, there will be more neighborhood-oriented signage as well. But I don't see it as a rivalry or anything like that.
No, thank you kindly.
I guess I'm actually not a proponent of this because I believe we're one city and the city is Toronto. I don't mind promoting the neighborhoods like Leaside, but I guess I'm struggling with this a bit. Yesterday I had a complaint from a committee member, a concern from a committee member saying that, you know, as we age, it's harder to read signs. And so this is going to make signs, street signs, very busy with all this potential logos and context words, content. So are you at all concerned about how busy these signs will look and people's ability to read them and to navigate our city?
I think there's such a thing as good design, and that if there is a will to fit more on one sign, that it can be done in a way without distracting from the major message, which might be the name of the street. You know? I too have had visitors in town who said they can't read the street signs. By the time they get to read the street signs, they've shot past.
Right, yes.
But no, I think this is something different. I think there's something above the sign, or there is the sign. I'm thinking of one sign in particular near the Trace Mains building in East York, Leaside, where the logo disappeared, but the sign stayed the same. There was just a blank spot above it, you know, and you hadn't been prevented from reading the information that was on the sign just because there was an East York logo on it.
And you prefer the former cities versus the neighborhoods? Because there is actually, I was just told by staff, there is a neighborhood policy currently in place. And I'm going to ask them more about that in a minute. But you prefer this former cities over the neighborhoods, like Leaside or Hogs Hollow or...
If one has to make a choice, I would say that at the moment, because we do have, you're asking me about where I live and specifically.
Yes.
We do have lots of things that say Leaside on them. So, but we have very few, increasingly few signs that say East York on them. So I would say East York at the moment.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
If I could ask questions, I know I'm not on the committee, but I just thought of something while you were asking your questions, Chair. Thanks very much, Carol, for coming to committee to speak to us. I was wondering if you've seen attachment 1 in the report. So I was wondering if I could approach the deputant, show her the 3 different designs and see if she has any objections, because...
Choice?
There's a nice diagram in the report.
Thank you. To me, the middle one is the easiest one to read.
So now that she's seen that, if everyone looks at attachment number 1, which one did you say that you preferred?
The middle one is the easiest one to read.
The one that has the East York logo in the bottom right-hand corner with the logo of the City of Toronto at the top, and also the Danforth Avenue, coincidentally. It's a coincidence that that's the attachment. Anyways, clearly on here, so thank you very much for that.
Okay, that wraps up questions of the speakers. Thank you to the speakers for coming here today. Now we're going to move to questions of staff. I definitely have a couple questions. Anybody else? Councillor Davis, do you have questions? Go ahead.
I just wanted to confirm, so the middle design, which has the logo down in one corner, do you have any concerns in terms of visibility, any operational concerns with that design?
Through you, Madam Chair, we identified some options based on whether the location in question was part of a business improvement association and therefore had its own indicator. I think of the three options, the one that you see on the bottom has sort of the most logos. It's the busiest, but it doesn't impact the visibility of the street name, which is the ultimate purpose of the sign. Would you agree?
Okay, so you also have this poppy here. Isn't it the case that you're already putting this poppy on some signs?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct.
And that is being done through some other decisions of community council, or council made a decision about that?
Through you, the community council takes that matter up and determines whether the street in question, if proposed, has a veteran, and that, I believe, is what those demonstrate.
Okay. So if there may be some questions about what if other municipalities want to do this? Is it reasonable to assume that the request, once council approves it, that it could come at the request of a community council? If council were to approve something that said, and any future ones come at the request of community council or something like that? Maybe I'll just leave that for now.
That's not your
We'll just
question.
leave that. Okay, so from an operations perspective, this is, you don't have any concerns with the options that are there? Yeah. Thank you.
From an operations perspective, in terms of visibility, I think the street name sign and the reflectivity will be the same.
Great, thank you very, and the cost, $3,000 to $4,000 per year, that's all it is?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, the cost is $3,000 to $4,000 for the application of the sticker to the sign.
Right.
And this would be applicable to signs that were just up for replacement due to damage or new street, not a retrofit program. That would be
Right, so
significantly
this would
more.
be for decommissioned signs, or replacement of decommissioned signs, because that's what our policy is. We only take signs down when they're falling apart, right?
That's correct, or a new street that was
Or a new street, right. So do you think you could find $3,000 or $4,000 internally in the budget?
Through you, Madam Chair, the funding of the replacement, the application will be through our operating budget.
Great, thank you very much. Maybe I'll just have one last question. I saw a submission here from the East York Foundation. The East York Foundation also said they're willing to look at potentially supporting this effort too. Would you be willing to discuss that with them?
Through you, we would certainly be happy to do that.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, who else had questions? Okay, Councillor Frакadakis, go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Sorry, I just wanted to ask again. So you said that in attachment 1, the 3 designs that are presented, not a single one of them has an issue in terms of its visibility to the driver, in terms of reflectivity, or that they could see it with the East York logo on it. For example, number 2 and number 3, they wouldn't hinder somebody's sight from seeing Danforth Avenue or other street names. Is that correct?
Through you, the safety component of the sign and the wayfinding component of the sign would stay the same, which would be about the size of the letters and the contrast so that people were able to see it, and the reflectivity of it. So that would stay the same,
And so
regardless of additional logos.
And we've had no issues with the street signs that currently have the poppy on it for people being distracted or getting lost.
Through you, not that we have heard or has been reported to us.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, Councillor Holiday.
Thank you. Have we finished converting all the signs in Toronto since the signs were in place from the former municipalities? They all done? They all brought up to this standard?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, we're still in process since 2007. We're probably in an area of a third to a quarter.
So-
We have about 80,000 signs.
Amalgamation was 96, so my next question was, how many decades does it take to do? But apparently more than 2.
So the new sign policy and design came in effect in 2007.
Okay.
So we've been actively at it since then.
At least a decade of working on it. Okay. How many shapes and symbols and things are already approved to go onto signs? I guess the poppy is. We just learned that today in a certain part of the city. Is there anything else out there?
So in addition to the poppy, the top portion of the sign blade is reserved for business improvement areas. So we would work with them. They would fund, as is the example of the Danforth Village image in the lower picture, they would fund for that section to have their logo applied to it.
So if I wanted to have a logo from the neighborhood that I live in, could I add a neighborhood to the bottom as well? I don't have a BIA.
So there's a different policy for neighborhood signs, so that you would work through that policy, which would flow through the division and ultimately through community council.
What about a former village like Islington or Mimico or Long Branch?
So
Not a neighborhood.
through you, Madam Chair, neighborhoods would flow through that other policy that I was talking about.
If I wanted to talk about the watershed that I live in, part of the Etobicoke Creek or the Mimico Creek Valley, or perhaps we wanted to examine an Aboriginal territory, could we do that as well? Or how would we handle a request that, we're sort of, what I'm getting at is there's layers upon layers of the identity of the neighborhoods that we're in, or the place that we live. Would we run out of space?
Well, the sign has a limited space, and the top blade is reserved for a BIA logo, and the bottom we've used to date for the municipal address, which is good for emergency responders and tourists trying to find, or neighbors trying to find their neighborhood. And in the last number of years, we've added the poppy as at the request of Community Council.
Could Community Council add an emoji? Sorry,
I haven't had that request
I'm being
yet.
a little bit tongue-in-cheek there, but I guess the last question, so I appreciate the graphics of this, and like someone spent time preparing this. Has anyone consulted with any communities of interest with respect to accessibility? Because I get it. I mean, signs are very, very important graphically. There's a visual identity, which is kind of a corporate branding thing. But there's also just making our way through the city. And, as you introduce visual distraction to anything, I mean, there's some design principles in that, but there may even be some human principles in that. Have we gone that far, or did we just get a mock-up for at least the report?
Through you, Madam Chair, the original sign design that came into effect in 2007 went through extensive design. We retained a consultant to look at the size, shape, the letter height, the font, the reflectivity, the placement of the sign at locations. So yes, we did do some rigor with regard to the design of the sign.
What about the symbols, though, along the bottom? Was that contemplated in the process, or is there value in sort of going back to some communities that have interest in this to say, how do you feel about sort of buttons and shapes and symbols across the bottom of the sign? Does that, you okay with that, or does it make things worse, better? I don't know.
Through you, Madam Chair, we'd be open to that, but as I said, the top portion of the sign has been reserved or identified for those types of identifiers.
Got it. BIAs.
The BIA.
And then the neighborhoods is a different policy. Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, I've got some quick questions too. So this, sorry, somebody else? Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Councillor Lee. Go ahead. I'm not in a hurry.
I think it may, thank you, Madam Chair. It may be along the same lines as well. The current neighborhood policy on street signs, what is it?
Yeah. One or two.
So you, through Madam Chair, there is a policy called Neighborhood and Business Area Identification Side. So it's a business area, not necessarily a BIA or a neighborhood. So there is a policy that looks at 10 to 15 different criteria that they have to meet. It does work through the process. Ultimately, it goes through the division. If the division is unclear on the recommendation, we would then bring it on to Community Council. In this case, the neighborhoods and the business areas would be responsible for the costs.
Okay, so in this case, East York, if the Community Council were to approve it under our neighborhood policy, then East York Council will be responsible for this cost?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think it would be the definition of what is a neighborhood. So East York, would it be deemed a neighborhood or would it be considered a former municipality? That would be something that would need to be looked at.
And what is normally the cost of putting up to sponsor a name, for example, the Lee site as just mentioned, if you want a Lee site name on the sign, what is the cost approximately?
So the cost of a brand new sign installed is approximately $250.
How much?
$250.
$250, but that's for the whole sign though?
That's for the whole sign.
But just for the portion which, with the logo on it that says Lee site, how much would that be part of the $250?
So through you, it wouldn't be that much less because we'd still have to have the crews to go out to replace the existing sign with the new sign. So it's still in the neighborhood of about $250.
So we do have a neighborhood policy right now.
We do have a neighborhood policy, and gladly work through that with you, Council.
Yeah, I kind of remember that when back in 2007 when we made the decision. But it was mostly pertaining to BIAs because, you know, most likely BIAs want it. But how about the old signs whereby annex is put on the sign, Yorkville is put on the sign, Beaches is on the sign. So when you replace that, you remove it completely?
Through you, Madam Chair, generally there is a removal of the sign because the former signs would have been in place. So we were going with the new design. So that sign would be placed in its entirety. And as I said, it costs approximately $250 per sign.
Per sign. And whoever wants to add that back in, like Beaches or Lee site, will have to find somebody to pay for it.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Lee asked some of my questions, but I just want to clarify, this clearly, in my mind, and maybe you can confirm, it contravenes the city's corporate identity program, this concept. Is somebody here from Stratcom?
Yes, hi. Yes, that's true. According to the corporate identity policy, we should be using the city's logo as adopted at amalgamation to identify the city and not the former municipality's logos.
So when did council adopt that policy to use only the city's corporate identity?
That was in 2000.
In 2000? So what happens to the policy then if this was approved?
That would be, I imagine, a council conversation if they want to reverse their previous decision.
And so council at that time endorsed or supported being one city, having one title, one name, one brand, Toronto.
Yes, exactly. This logo was chosen as the one symbol to identify the unified amalgamated city.
And why was that? Maybe you weren't there at the time, but why was that the staff recommended that, or that was a council motion? Do you know how the genesis of that?
I don't know. I wasn't there at the time. I believe it was a council decision.
Okay, so this is in contravention of that. And then I guess I would ask transportation staff. I guess, Mike, maybe this is a bit of a tough question for you to answer, but my concern, as I was alluding to with the speakers, is the sign becoming too busy and too many demands on the sign. And really what we want to communicate to people is what street they're on. And it's hard enough I find the signs tough to read. And then I find people slamming on their brakes to try to read them, and then we end up with rear-end collisions, et cetera. So I'm a little worried about just the practicality of the signs becoming too busy. Can somebody address that?
Through you, Madam Chair. So when the sign was originally designed, we did look at the letter height and the size and the conspicuity of the sign for reaction in nighttime. So we did take those factors into consideration. In general, a sign's more effective if it's standalone. But we did identify, as I said, that the top portion of the sign was originally identified for BIAs to be included into the design.
So BIAs, meaning referencing Councillor Lee's questions about BIAs and the neighborhood policy, which has been endorsed by council.
That's correct.
And can you just give us an example of that without maybe flipping to the report, but how would, based on the neighborhood policy, how would the sign appear? in with the current policy?
So through you, Madam Chair, a business improvement area would approach the Transportation Division to request that the BIA logo be included on the sign. They generally provide the artwork. We work with them to work so the artwork fits the top portion of the sign. There's generally a few iterations back and forth, and then we work through the financing of the sign. Now, the BIA has to, we work through our ACDEV friends to make sure that the BIA is established in the boundary of the BIA, because we want to make sure we're only signing within that BIA.
And so could this become down the road like multi-layered, that you have the BIA or let's say Yorkville or the Danforth, or then you have, the city, the former city, and then you have the street name and possibly then the City of Toronto logo? I mean, is there some, how do you accommodate all that in a simple street sign?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think the lower version of the street sign on attachment 1 would identify how we would accommodate a BIA, the street name itself, the municipal number, and then the inclusion of the logos.
So the third, on attachment 1, the third example?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. Move to speakers. Okay, so we have 3 minutes till we have to recess for lunch. Do committee members want to go through, or you want to recess? I think the items after this are very quick, because I've got some updates for you from Councillor Mamalady was actually right. Brace yourself. Yes, so can we have a motion to complete the agenda? Councillor Holiday, seconded by Councillor Lee. Let's try to go really quickly here. So Councillor Davis.
I'm wondering, Councillor Perruzza has agreed to move a motion on my behalf, and I wonder if you could just put it on the screen. Let me just start by saying thank you to the staff for bringing forward a report that gives some of the history and also identified how a logo might be incorporated into a sign. I can tell you that our community of East York has an enduring sense of identity. It has remained strong since amalgamation, and there is an incredible sense of pride in our community amongst all of the neighborhoods that make up East York. You can go to the skate park and find a giant East York logo painted onto the skate park, and they do it every year because the East York skate team is very proud of coming from East York. You can go to East York Collegiate and find dozens of kids like mine with an East York logo tattooed on some part of their body. You can continue to go to the East York Historical Society, the East York Foundation, the East York Garden Club. I could continue to list for you the organizations that have continued to thrive through amalgamation. And those organizations have done so within the context of an amalgamated city. But I don't see any problem with helping us to maintain that sense of community and pride by putting a small logo on our signs. We have municipalities right across the world, New York City, Montreal, where the boroughs continue to have identities and continue to have them identified in the public space. There is absolutely nothing wrong. What's wrong with having a East York logo on a sign? We're violating the corporate policy. Brand. Do you think that in any way having an East York logo is going to break the Toronto brand? No, absolutely not. There is a very strong sense of, as I said, of pride and identity And I know that the people of East York will be very excited to see the logo once again. You know, you may laugh at my analogy, but we have grown as a country in a way to accommodate local differences. And we have accommodated Quebec. There are ways that we have kept our country united by finding accommodations. This is a very small accommodation that recognizes both we are part of the City of Toronto, but we are a unique neighborhood, a unique portion, a unique geographic area in the City of Toronto. So we have signs at Canada Day that say, "Our Canada includes East York," and we give them away by the dozen because people recognize that we're special. People love where they live. And I think this small accommodation is one that the city can both afford and that the city can support without in any way jeopardizing our corporate brand. So I hope you will support this motion. And I believe that it also will identify that it is the middle design that we are supporting, which is on those signs that are not BIA signs, that they would have a logo. So in no spot would there be a Toronto sign beside an East York sign.
Councillor Fragadas, you're up.
Thanks, and I made that amendment, and Councillor Perruzza has agreed to move it, and it's as per the middle option in attachment 1 as referenced by one of the deputants. And so I'll try to be brief, because I know we're in the lunch hour, but we have a whole city department dedicated to the issue of heritage, and as you heard from some of the deputants today, many feel that we're excluding or neglecting East York on that front. I actually think this is an extension of our current policy that recognizes neighborhoods, so I have a difference of opinion with some about that. The city's corporate identity policy, we heard, was approved back in 2000. I think that policy updates from time to time are usually helpful. It's actually the reason we meet as a council. We have no reason to meet if all we do is just approve whatever staff tells us to approve. We have these discussions for about 25% of every council agenda where we deviate slightly from the policy, and I think that that is helpful. I think it's actually healthy. I don't think it undermines our corporate identity, but I think it actually helps to bring our city's history to life. I mean, obviously, I'm supportive of the East York logo because I actually represent that area. It's actually the area that I've lived in my whole life. But I would certainly be supportive and did move the motion at council for Scarborough to have that identifier. I would support Etobicoke having it, North York, York, just other communities that want to be recognized on the street signs. I would support that. I don't think that it confuses people. I don't think it makes the sign cluttered, because I don't think that they're going to focus on that and not on the name of the street that they're looking for. So I ask you to support this, and I'm sure we'll have another discussion about this at council in 2 weeks.
Thank you. And actually, it's Councillor Mamaladies next, and then Councillor Perruzza. He asked before you. And then,
Before I speak, though, just on a point of order, we're trying to change policy on the fly here. Is that what we're trying to do? Is there a process for changing policy?
Is this in order?
You will need to change policy. Corporate identity policy will need to be amended. This will require a change to the corporate identity policy.
So I'm right again.
Council will need to approve that.
You guys need to listen to me a little more. Just saying. So what's just on a question? How do you change policy? Do you do it through an agenda item or?
The report before us says to receive it for information, staff's recommendations.
Past questions, right? Like, I thought we were speaking.
Councillor Davis, we're trying to have a conversation here so the report before us is to receive for information.
Right,
which I'm going to move.
right.
My understanding is Councillor Perruzza has another motion, and I don't know if Councillor Lee still has another motion too. So there's a couple motions that are floating.
My point of order is, we're going to entertain motions to do what? Because anything contrary to the receipt recommendation would mean we got to go somewhere else with policy change. Where is that? We're a committee.
Because what's before us is received for information. So how do, if this,
Should this policy change go to council, we need to include an amendment to the motion that the corporate policy be amended accordingly.
so it would be an amendment, in the form of an amendment?
And would that be a two-thirds vote in council?
We could vote on that amendment here and send that recommendation to council, and council will need to approve it.
Would the change in policy, though, that would be a change in policy, is that a two-thirds vote in council, in changing policy?
I don't think so. I think it's a majority vote.
It's a majority.
That's,
Okay, so, I mean, I'll speak. Madam Chair, you know, I said earlier at the beginning that things are done at committee, last minute. We're trying to venture into helping a community out that needs help, obviously. But, you know, when others try to do certain things at committee, we're told we can't do it. And then other things happen, and all of a sudden it becomes an order. And you understand where guys like me get frustrated, because I tend to be the guy that people say you're not allowed to do this with, right? Now, all of a sudden, we're allowed to change policy on the fly. Doesn't matter what that policy is. So it's not a one-fits-all policy here at City Hall with the way committees work. I feel a bit slighted because I've tried to do this stuff before, and I've been told I can't. Having said that, I don't think this is the place to deal with this. I think it's City Hall. I think it's council at City Hall. And I would be supporting the East York recommendations in changing the policy. Because I think that our neighborhoods need special recognition when it comes to signage. It makes them proud, it makes them who they are. And those of us that were around at the amalgamation time in those days, we were actually guaranteed back then that we wouldn't lose our focus on neighborhoods. And slowly we're starting to do that. This isn't about a sign, in my opinion. This is much larger than a sign and whether we should be recognizing a local community, Mimico, others. This is about whether or not people have been content with the megacity. And maybe the issue should be, should we be going back to what we're used to? Should we break apart amalgamation? That should be the debate, because the same people that are arguing that they want East York are probably going to argue that they'd rather go back to the way it was, because Toronto hasn't given back anything to the former municipalities. The former municipalities have subsidized Toronto. North York, who I love very much, isn't the North York of one time. Etobicoke is not the Etobicoke that we experienced one time. They've become dirtier. They've become less attractive. Nothing gets pruned anymore. You got weeds growing out of sidewalks, curbs. Nobody seems to care anymore. To me, that's what the debate's about. It's not about whether or not East York should be on a sign. What they're really trying to tell everybody here is amalgamation has not worked for our neighborhoods. It's only worked for one city, the former city of Toronto. Amalgamation was the former city of Toronto's best friend. So maybe that should be the debate, and not whether or not we should be cluttering our signs with different messages, because I don't like number 3, if you ask me, and I don't necessarily like 2 either, to be honest with you. But if we're going to distinguish communities, then it needs to be all communities, with the same kinds of messages, and not just, in this case, you've got a report that's not even being recommended. In fact, it's been recommended by staff to just kill it. And what about North York? And what about Etobicoke? And what about no, and it's not about justice, it's about process. And I just think we're going about it the wrong way. And if we've got to change the policy, let's rethink the policy and change it properly without doing it on the fly right now. Because while I agree with what's going on in East York, I don't agree that we should be dealing with it like this. That's it. So you can throw all the motions out today that you want on this stuff, but I think it's still breaking the policy itself, our bylaws around how we're supposed to be working as committees. I'm not even sure they're in order, quite frankly.
Okay, thank you. And our next speaker is Councillor Perruzza. And then we're going to go to Councillor Holiday and then Councillor Lee.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to move the motion and add the words subject to amending, and add, just continue to add the transportation service, and that the corporate identity policy amended accordingly, just so that we, as Councillor Mammoliti suggests, stay within the box in doing what the box prescribes us to do, and would allow us to put a little sticker on these signs in the former municipality of East York. History is a funny thing, and I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I wasn't going to go into a historical diatribe, but Councillor Mammoliti has a way of stoking my sentiments around many of these issues, and York has or the name York has a rather long history with us. I don't know how Lord, what was his name, John Graves Simcoe, would have sat here and listened to Councillor Mammoliti's comments as he basically strode into what was then called Upper Canada and decided that he was going to rename this region after, I believe, and this I'm going by memory because we were trying to Google some of the history. I believe there was a water course that ran basically from, and I don't know what the precursor to Lake Simcoe, later became Lake Simcoe, down to Lake Couchiching. So Couchiching, I'm assuming, is a name that exceeds historically Lord Simcoe. But that area, that water course, was called Toronto, and then the Toronto kind of moved south, and this region, I believe, was originally called, well, not originally called, because there's history before that, but in our limited 300 or 400 year history, it was called Toronto. And then along comes Lord Simcoe, and in wanting to honor Prince Frederick, I believe his name was Frederick something or other, Duke of York, renamed the region York, or Fort York, I believe it was called at the time. And then you'll all know how that kind of, County of York, East York, North York, it continues on, York region, and it continues on. And I think that if you take York even further back, I think it comes from the York area of England, Northern England, Yorkshire. And I think that if you roll the clock back a little further on that, Ibucurum, the Latin name, meant something like yew tree. But who are we to relive that history? East York is a signpost of our, and the reason why I moved the motion, Madam Chair, East York, like North York, like Etobicoke, is a signpost of our recent history. And there are some folks who have an affinity to that signpost. They just simply don't want it to kind of be discarded on the dust heap of history and, for the time being, be completely lost. So they're asking to put a little sticker on some road signs. They're really, what are we talking about here, right? Asking to put a little sticker, a little symbol. I don't know how Lord John Graves Simcoe or Prince Frederick would feel about adding that little symbol to his coat of arms. We're not going to go there because he's not around anymore, right? He's way, way underground, right? Yeah, for sure. But they're asking to put this little sticker on their street signs, basically marking this signpost in this very recent modern history. People don't want it to be just simply forgotten. It's not that big a deal. Really not that big a deal. And it's certainly something that we can do quite simply. So I'm happy to move that motion, and I'm happy to support it at the end of the debate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lee, we're going to have you speak next because Councillor Holloway is working on a motion, and you're ready.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the history lesson. I won't give you a history of Toronto. Anyways, I got a motion, and my motion is to request the General Manager of Transportation Services report to the Public Works Committee meeting in the November meeting for feasibility of incorporating neighborhood identifiers on street name signs. I remember back in 2007, we did work on the street sign format and approved the current design. And just like what the deputant was saying, I'm now in real life finding that a lot of times people are driving past the sign without seeing the sign. But what I like about this one is because Toronto is composed of 140 or more neighborhoods. And some of it has really historical value to it. So I think instead of trying to get somebody to pay for putting the signs on, what is the incremental cost of putting the name of the district or even logo, just like similarly to East York, on the sign? You know, when I asked, it says $250 to replace the sign, but what's the incremental cost? Okay. So these are the things that I want to get a report back on. If we would allow historical names like districts, for example, Beaches, Rosedale, Yorkville, the Annex. Okay, if we allow that to be put back on based on community council approval, then I think it is inherent for us to have that identification for the areas that we represent. So this report is just asking for staff to report back on what is the feasibility as well as the cost to do that, the incremental cost to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
So how is this different than the policy we already have in place for neighborhoods?
Right now, the policy, that's why I asked, the policy says that the area must pay for it. Right now, I'm saying that what if the city pays for it? What's the cost?
I'm a history guy.
Okay, that's why I asked a specific question. Who's paying for it? So in the old days, when we made the decision, I know that the BIAs, if they want the BIA name on the street sign, then they have to pay for it. So if an area, for example, you represent the area up in Eglinton, all right, area.
Let's just see if you know where my area.
So if they want the name Eglinton Village on the sign, then the Eglinton Village will have to pay for it, or the community association, somebody has to pay for it.
Or you can pay with it out of Section 37 money.
Section 37 money, I don't think is allowed to be used for this. Not that I'm aware of.
You can.
You can?
Yep.
Okay.
Capital. His commission to come here and give us a
Well, when we place the sign, it can be capital.
Well, the prince would have had some influence, and if they were buddies, right?
Okay, Councillor Holloway's next.
Thank you, Chair. I have a very brief motion and that is that City Council refer this to the Disability Advisory Committee. I don't think we've got input from what I heard in my questions from the people that need to read the signs, and I would appreciate that. I guess just on this policy, Chair, I understand you're going to move receipt, so I don't need to do that. A romantic notion indeed, and this comes from a guy that's got the Etobicoke flag proudly flying in his office, although, Councillor Davis, you got one on me if you've got a tattoo of East York. I mean, I've got an Etobicoke tie clip. I thought I was doing pretty good, but good on you. But the devil is in the details on this, and I want to remind everybody, ask the question, have we changed all the signs? We haven't even finished in Toronto of changing it to this one. So we've got like 25 years of a Technicolor dog's breakfast ahead of us. So, you know, the detail is we'll start to change a couple of signs, and we'll have these little symbols here and there. And then, you know what the next point is the pressure now to accelerate that and change more signs, because we got to get the sticker on them, because it looks funny. You know, this street has it, this one doesn't. So from a very practical standpoint, I can't support this. I think there's a lot of ways that city councilors can support the identity of their cities that they came from that formed amalgamation. And Councillor Mamaludi is right, you know, there's undertones of this de-amalgamation discussion here, but it's manifesting in a sticker on a sign. And if you examine it on its merits, I think it's just a bad idea just to implement. But I can tell you this, you know, as a councillor, I feel the strength of, or the core of my duty here is to protect the neighborhood identity. And, you know, Councillor Davis fired a shot earlier today in a meeting, and I don't mean to point too harshly on the example, but you said, you know, there should be parking on the street all over the city. Well, I'll tell you, in the central Etobicoke neighborhood that I represent, the identity of us are those unencumbered streets. And I think the neighborhood would probably de-amalgamate before they would ever permit on-street parking, because that is a wholesale character change. It represents urbanization. It is not our identity. So councillors have to step up and notice these very subtle changes. They come in the form of development. They come in the form of our roads. They come in the form of changes to park programming, to allocation of money in the city. These are the core things that make up our identity in the neighborhoods that we represent. Let's not be lost in the discussion of a sticker. Let's be consumed with the discussion of all of these very fine points about representing the desires and the needs and the wants of the people that elected us here, and recognize that neighborhoods are different and there are different needs across the city. That's what I think we should be doing. Let's just drop this idea of a sticker on a sign, because it's going to take years to implement, and halfway through it we're going to change our mind again and do something completely different. Or other people will ask for stickers, and then we'll just have this cluttered mess, and there'll be no identity of anything. You know, that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Any other speakers? I'll say a couple words, but it'll only take a minute. I, maybe like you, I fought amalgamation way back when. I went out and door knocked. Oh yes, I'll start by saying I'm going to move receipt, that I'm going to remove for information, receive for information as per the motion or the recommendation from staff. On the report. So I like you, I'm guessing, fought amalgamation, was out door knocking, trying to convince North York not to go down this road. And as we all know, the outcome was different from what many of us wanted. And here we are, here we sit amalgamated many years down the road. The city created a policy. A lot of thought went into that policy from staff as well as City Council, and City Council adopted a policy. This contravenes that policy, and so we're straying from what we've kind of our plan that we've laid out. So I'm basically, as I said, I'm saying we should receive this for information as per the staff recommendation in the report before us. I don't have an issue with promoting neighborhoods, but we are Toronto. That's our name, and we're not the former cities. I don't have a problem with the other of the former cities being on other signs. I don't even have a problem with the city funding some of those signs. What I do have a concern with is the street signs, the fact that they'll be very busy looking, cluttered, And it's hard enough to navigate the city and look at these signs. So I am going to be, as I said, I'm going to repeat myself for the third time, receiving this for information as per the staff recommendation in the report before us, because we are truly one city, and the city is Toronto. So we have a number of motions to juggle here, and I'll ask the clerk to identify the running order.
I'd like to ask for a recorded vote on each and every one, Madam Chair, just so we're clear, crisply clear.
All those in favor of amending the motion by Councillor Perruzza that's before you? Councillor Carmichael Greb, Councillor Perruzza, Councillor Lee. All those opposed? Councillor Holliday, Chair Robinson, Councillor Mammalidi, that motion loses on a tie vote.
When you bring it back with a whole policy change, I'll support it all, but not hit and miss like this.
So who's next? What motion is Councillor Holliday's?
Councillor.
Okay, so Councillor, well, I think he wanted to vote on all of them. He asked for a recorded. Did you, Councillor Perruzza, did you ask for a recorded vote on all of them? Yes, he did.
So recorded vote on the motion before you from Councillor Lee. All those in favor? Chair Robinson, Councillor Lee, Councillor Mammalidi. All those opposed? Councillor Carmichael Greb, Councillor Holliday, Councillor Perruzza. That motion fails on a tie vote.
And so is the next motion redundant then? They're referring it to, no?
Council still do not.
Okay. Do you want to pull it?
But this is good, though. This is a good.
Just so I understand on a point of order, the implication of this motion. I'm not sure what I'm referring at this point in time because there's no recommendation. Do I have the privilege of pulling this or withdrawing this motion, considering I think the next one in order is the motion to receive?
Yeah, so all those in favor of removing the motion?
Yeah, so the request has been made to withdraw the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, and then...
Speaker, or Chair,
Motion to adopt the item which is before you, which is the recommendation in the report to receive. All those in favor? Councillor Holliday, Chair Robinson, Councillor Mammalidi. All those opposed? Councillor Carmichael Greb, Councillor Chinley, Councillor Perruzza. That motion fails on a tied vote. The item will go to council without recommendations.
okay, thank you.
Next item, and I know everybody has commitments they need to get to, so we need to really move quickly on these next items so we can wrap up. So the next item is item 12. And that item is the utility locates. I believe this is a referral for a report. I think Councillor Mammalidi, you held it.
So I held it because I don't understand this in its entirety. Are we still charging local BIAs for these locates?
Yeah. Why don't we have Miles address it? Yeah.
Through you, Madam Chair, presently each BIA is responsible for funding and arranging the locates as they are the owner of the plant.
Just to be clear, this is a request for staff to write a report on this issue, Councillor Mammalidi, just so you're aware. So we have
Yeah,
economic development in the
I get
room
it,
and
but
transport.
Along with this issue, there should be a whole slew of other things that you report on, and that's how much we have gouged our local BIAs with other costs, like its street furniture policies, and in particular the stones and how much we're charging them now. Can someone quickly elaborate on how much we just approved to charge BIAs for those ventures recently?
Through you, Madam Chair, the recently adopted policy on material that would be used by BIAs and the standard that the city has not set an increased amount on those BAAs.
Well, that's...
The city still undertakes a 50/50 cost sharing when it comes to streetscape enhancements with BIAs.
Right, but we have increased the value of those materials to BIAs. And yes, you're right, it's still 50/50, but we've increased the value of those costs of materials to an unaffordable, unprecedented amount of money. And I'd like any future report to talk about how much we've gouged our BIAs in this sense. Are we going to be doing that with this report when
Are you
it comes
speaking
back?
to transportation or to economic development?
This to
They're
me-
also in the room, and they oversee.
I don't know who I'm speaking to, Madam Chair. I'm doing it through you, right?
Yeah.
But my point is, it's not just about this for me. It's about all the money that we are now seeking from our local BIAs, right? And what we've done to them over the last year or so.
Okay, can I ask economic development to address your question?
Through you, Madam Chair, certainly as part of this report that's coming forward in October on specifically on utility locate fees, we can address in general terms other fees that are applicable to business improvement areas?
Not in general sense. I think the materials that have gone up dramatically for BIAs are costing them to the point where they can't not use those materials anymore because they can't afford it. Can we be more specific in terms of the increase of costs to BIAs over the last little while, as well as this, or not? I'm sorry, Councillor Davis, I'm not talking to you. But I'm not talking to you, and you're, okay.
Through the chair, I think, Councillor, when you take a look at the report and the request to report back, it really deals with the cost associated with an obligation that we have provincially to undertake locates of underground infrastructure before a contractor begins to dig. So there's an obligation for all utilities and the BIAs, because they are owners of underground plant, have an obligation to ensure that locates are undertaken and there's a cost associated with that work before any underground construction takes place. So that's what the report is about. It's really specific to...
The answer to the question about me wanting everyone to know exactly how much we've increased the costs associated to the BIAs is not going to be a part of this upcoming report.
Through the chair, it's not material to this report. That would be, from my standpoint, would be a separate request, separate and apart from the request before you in terms of reporting back on locate specifically.
Councillor Mamalady, I have a motion that I'd like to put forward. You might want to add or amend to it, so if I could do that at this time.
Yeah, okay.
Is that okay?
I've made...
No, we're in committee. There's the motion. Well, then you should have spoken up, because we went into committee with...
No, you don't.
So you want to speak on the item, or you want to ask questions? Okay, that's fine. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I thought you wanted to ask questions, so I was confused.
Yes, sorry. Now I'm confused that there's another motion coming forward.
It's just your motion tweaked, as per the clerks, the city clerks. It's the same motion, but it's properly written by the clerk department. Clerk's department.
I did have... Okay. So I am here to speak in favor of this. Originally, it was my motion, and the intention is to look at ways that we could support the BIAs in meeting their obligations under the new provincial regulations. It seems to me that while we enter into relationships with the BIAs and they invest their levy into our infrastructure, and we acknowledge that infrastructure is theirs, all of that infrastructure is in our public right-of-way. And one of our BIAs is having expressed some concerns about this obligation to the provincial government, which is how I found out about this, although I went back and reread the original report. We also have an obligation as a city to provide the information anytime anyone is doing any work in the BIA areas. Both the city and the BIA are obligated under provincial regulations to have a contractor to go in and to provide the locates that are in the affected area. I think this is ridiculous. It's a duplication. It, in the end, is our infrastructure, I believe, paid for by someone else, but it is in the public right-of-way. So I think we need to look at options for how we can do this in a way that's more streamlined, and also to look at some efficiencies in costs or the reduction in duplication, so that maybe one contractor is doing it, or maybe the city would pick up the cost. Those are options that might come before us in this report. And at that point, we should give the BIAs an option to come forward and speak about the burden that this places on them. They raise their own money to help beautify our streets, and I don't think that should also burden them with the additional obligation of paying the exorbitant costs for these locates on one call. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Mamalady.
Well, let's just get something straight out and out of the clear. There's a reason you don't hear from the BIAs as much as we'd like, and that's because most of the time they'd like to speak against city policies that are hurting them as their own identity, and they're not allowed to legally. So they can't come here and say anything that's contrary to our policy, okay? And BIAs can't do that legally. So that's why you don't see them objecting. That's why you don't see them here. But I assure you, those boards, the board meetings of your BIAs, you all hear it for yourself. They're not happy with what's going on, and we're just letting it go on, right? This is just one of the many things that they're unhappy with. They're being gouged with these kinds of costs, and they can't afford it, right? And then the material, and I need to bring this out, the material costs that we have borne on them now is unaffordable, to the point where many of these smaller BIAs in particular are not going to be able to buy their colored stones anymore. They're not going to be able to put that unique flavor on their communities. They're going to go back to concrete, and they're going to go back to asphalt, because we're making them go broke. And we're feeing everybody to death in this city, everybody. And so this is the point I'm trying to make here, is that everybody should know what's going on. It's like these hidden fees that are going on everywhere, and we just let it go. Our community BIAs are not going to be able to survive the way they are if we keep feeing them to death like this, right? That's why they're crying. And in those board meetings, you will hear them say, we can't go contrary legally to the city's bylaws and the city's policies. So they can't even talk to us about how they're feeling, right? We're the ones, the councillors know it, and we're the ones that are supposed to do something about it. So that's why I rose it. Madam Chair, it may not be in order, and I apologize if I want all the information to come out, but I'm not going to end it here. I think somebody needs to speak for them. And Councillor Davis, I hope you're right. I hope you can get the costs offset somehow so that they don't have to pay even for these costs. But I don't think that's what's going to happen here. I don't. I think, in fact, it's going to be worse for them. I'll wait for the report, but I'm not counting on something good that comes out of this. I think it's going to be worse. Let's just get rid of BIAs if we don't want to support them. Let's just say it. Let's come out and say, let's stop it then, right? They're our best friends when it comes to saving the city money. And sorry, guys. I'm kind of into myself right now. They're our best friends when it comes to certain things, and we treat them like our worst enemies at times. And that's how all of them are feeling right now, whether we want to admit it or not.
Thank you very much. Councillor Holyday would like to speak.
I'm not going to support carrying forward on this. I just have this picture of a big ladle dipping into the tax base again, scooping some more dollars out. I am sympathetic to the plight of BIAs. I think they're working hard to try to do something better for the community that they're in, but I'm not sure that I have to pass along decisions that were made before and the cost implications, the life cycle cost implications of those decisions now onto the taxpayer. You know what, probably people had good intentions when they decided to build that electrical pole or install that piece of equipment, but no one stopped and thought about that at the time, about what does this mean in terms of its life cycle. And yeah, part of the life cycle is going to be you're going to have to explain to people that are digging around there where the wires are. And that's going to take some work, some effort, maybe some cost. But to now say, well, let's stick it to the taxpayers in the city. I appreciate the businesses in those BIAs are taxpayers, but stick it to the general tax base. And that was part of the discussion with the pavers, is there was this incremental extra cost that somehow ended up trickling to the tax base. And I'm not sure that that's right. And I think, you know, there's a process that needs to be strengthened here. I think the BIAs need to be supported so that when they make these choices, these improvements, these changes, they've got full sight of all of these costs and they've got a plan for it. And when they've got all that figured out, then we should be moving on with supporting them in the decision, not catching the things that fall through later on. And so I just can't support this at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. I'm actually going to, Councillor Holliday's inspired me to also vote against this. And I was placing the motion simply because it needed to be placed because it was technical amendment, so maybe Councillor Mamalady can place it for us. But I also agree with him, having had conversations with the former General Manager of Transportation, this could end up being very costly for taxpayers. It is above and beyond, as Councillor Holliday has described. So I'd like to echo his comments. I am a huge fan and proponent of the BIAs. I work with mine closely. They're incredible organizations. But what this is about is above and beyond, and incremental costs, as well as when they're doing something very elaborate, then they should have to fund that particular item. So this is a complex issue. It's confusing on first read. But I've had a number of conversations with staff over the last couple of years on this, and it could end up being very costly to the taxpayer, and it's based on something that might be above and beyond what the taxpayer should be funding. So I'm going to ask Councillor Mamalady to move the clerk's motions that they've tweaked, and I'm going to be voting with Councillor Holliday.
Well, Madam Chair, I will move your motion. I'll say that I see BAs similar to our 3P models, working with the private sector as well, and there's no reason to come in to work these kinds of equations out with the private sector to help out with those costs.
Do you want to amend it? Do you want to amend that motion?
I'm just giving you the logic as to why I'm moving
okay.
the motion. Because it's not just about costs, it's about it's almost like a 3P policy.
Could you amend the motion to add that in? Just add a few words to add in that concept?
That I don't see this any different than any other 3P model.
So could you say, and staff to review that model?
The 3P models? No, because it's still the private sector. It's the business community that's working our communities with the city and with.
You could say corporate partnerships. I don't know. It's up to you.
I'll say corporate partnerships. I'll work with the clerk on it. Okay, you know what? Councillor Davis heckling. I'm not doing anything. You can take it to council.
No, I think that's an excellent point, Councillor Perruzza. Right now, there's nothing before us. What's before us is the recommendation from staff was simply to adopt, I guess. Oh, yes, it's not, am I correct? I've been corrected. It's from, it came from, again, I'm not a fan of these, but it came from council as a recommendation from Councillor Davis.
I will take that on and move that exactly what you had written before, October 18th.
So Councillor Lee is moving that.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Can we just see what Councillor is moving?
He's moving the clerk's amendment to Councillor Davis's motion from council.
It's the same as what Councillor Janet Davis put forward, but with the date change, October 18th.
That's right.
And it's for a report to come back to look at all the different options and implications for the city coordinating the performance of the locates. So we are not making policy changes. We're asking for a report coming back here to identify what the issues are and also the cost and the various options. So we are not making any decisions now. We're asking for a report back so that the staff can provide us the information to make that decision, on October 18th.
And I want to thank Councillor Lee for taking the confusion and making it crisp.
So
Just so helpful.
there are still
word
a
of the
lot
day.
questions.
Word of the day is
but
crisp.
At least we'll have the information.
Does everybody
make
concur?
the decision on October 18th.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lee. And we're going to vote on that now. Okay.
Just so I understand the voting sequence, are we going to vote twice? First to amend and then the item is amended? Am I correct? Just to amend the item, so there's one vote on this. Okay, thank you kindly.
Okay, all those in favor? And that's 3 opposed. That's 3, so it loses on a tie. Okay, we're going to move on to the next item. We really have to wrap up because I know people are under the gun. I've been advised from the clerk. Okay, so can we quickly do the last couple items here? They'd be very fast if everybody can just stay tuned. So the first one, I know Councillor Layton is here because these are his items, but he missed the debate at the beginning of the meeting, and so he's not completely in the loop. So what I've been advised, actually, that Councillor Mammoliti, brace yourselves, is indeed correct. This climate adaptation and managing Toronto's stormwater in the face of climate change. There was a comprehensive report, 2017 Wet Weather Flow Master Plan Implementation Status Update, April 24th, 2017. So this item is actually redundant, deemed redundant. And what we can do with it is to go back to Councillor Mammoliti's original idea of deferring it indefinitely, or we can refer it to staff. Those are really our options, because if you remember this report, it's covered off in here. So what would committee like to do? Because we voted on deferring it indefinitely, it lost. So we can either go back to procedurally reopening that, or also the other option is to refer this to staff.
So how do you reopen it? It has to be somebody who voted the other way?
I don't know.
You vote on the prevailing side, so.
I don't think anybody,
So Councillor Holiday?
Yep.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Is there an opportunity to speak to the item? If I was to be very brief.
Sure, I'm happy with that.
I had hoped that the difference between this and the original Wet Weather Flow Master Plan update was that it was looking for new tools, and that's essentially what I was asking there. If I've got to go to a think tank or a university and find those tools and ask specifically about them, then that's what I'll do if it's the will of this committee. I was just hoping, given just the amount of water and precipitation we got this year, if Public Works Committee isn't willing to consider stormwater management in light of the islands closed for 3 months, hurricanes wreaking havoc on the South Americas, I just don't see what the point is of the committee if you're not going to at least look at stormwater management in light of the recent developments. So I'm fine to bring one-offs here and there. I suspect they'll all get referred, but I'm quite happy to keep doing it. So thank you.
I think we have a motion. You have a motion? Okay, go ahead.
The motion is to refer to staff for consideration.
Okay, we have a motion before us. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Okay, that item's done. Okay, and on the other item, Councillor Layton, I'm assuming you're here for. Again, I've got an update from staff on this issue. This is the cool idea, the dockless bike sharing. But again, I have an update for committee. This is already in play. It's going to executive committee in November. A report from the Toronto Parking Authority to talk about bike share issues and funding model, and this is part and parcel of that. So what committee could do today is ask this to be included as part of the reporting back by the General Manager of Transportation as part of this November executive report with the Toronto Parking Authority. So we're being asked to refer it. So it's being recommended by the clerk to refer it. Is everybody okay with that?
Yep.
All in favor? That carries. And then the last item is Councillor Pasternak's. Councillor Perruzza has a motion on this.
I do. Councillor Pasternak and I share a section of Dufferin Street, not to make it long. He's sort of wanted to open it up for everybody, and I think we need to kind of go slow, and I just want to give the staff ample opportunity to think about what this section of Dufferin Street might look like in the future and who might use it, because as you all know, we spent somewhere in the neighborhood of about $40 million some time ago to create a bus away from the current Downsview station up to York University. And as the subway comes into operation later this year, we need to think about what that busway may be used for in the future. And I think that my motion, unlike Councillor Pasternak's motion, gives the staff a lens that a much bigger lens to look at how and what this street might look like and who these lanes might be used by on a go-forward basis. And it's something I worked with staff on, and they're very, very comfortable with it. It also expands the timelines a little bit because I believe that there's some transit study, some transit work that's also going on for this area, and we need to bring that all back together at one time in one way with a broader review.
Okay, we have a question from Councillor Holladay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to know if, in the preparation of the motion, if you worked things out with Councillor Pasternak on that, and if he's supportive of this motion, because I guess it's a shared border or edge.
Well, yeah, it's a shared street. So Councillor Pasternak has brought several motions already to North York Community Council in sort of opening up the lanes. I mean, he's made his views very clear on this. He would like those lanes to be used by everybody. That's essentially what he brought forward several years ago. And I understand he gets the same pressure put on him by his residents that I do. You know, like people would look at the lane and say, well, why should buses only be on it? You know, I should be able to use it as well. Well, we built it for buses because we built a busway to take people from Downsview Station to York University. You know, there's like 2,400 buses going to York University daily, right? That's why we did it. That's why we spent $40 million as a city to do. So now that the buses, some of the buses might be coming off that roadway, I think staff should have an opportunity to look at that and say, well, there's still buses, there's still others, so let's see what and how it might be used on a go-forward basis, and that's all my motion does.
Because there's now the
as opposed to just simply say to them, go do a study on how you open it up for everybody, right?
Yeah, I have to agree. Like, I also wish Councillor Pasternak was here, that you had consulted with him, because we don't know how he feels about this adjustment.
I've just explained to you how he feels. He's made that clear at North York, where you and I sit, a number of times.
I see it once a month.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, move it.
So, yeah.
Okay. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Madam Chair, I guess on a point of order, if you can guide me on how to do this. I know that I'd spoken to Councillor Pasternak, and he was clear about the desire to eliminate. So I wondered if Councillor Perruzza would consider it as a friendly amendment to include the words.
It does include that for everybody.
Does it say to either amend or eliminate would be my recommendation, and we'll let the report read as the report reads.
I think they're going to look at everything, Councillor Holiday. I think it looks at allowing cars, single person occupied cars, as well as everybody else.
So, okay.
I love
Thank
my
you for the
car.
clarity.
I love
Yeah.
my car.
Hard
And
to
I'd
know
like
what to
be
do
able
'cause he's
use
not
all of
here.
Dufferin Street as well. Huh?
Yeah,
So
okay.
I got the advice that it does indeed cover the scenario that it could be proposed to remove the lanes, which I think meets the spirit of Councillor Pasternak's motion, the only difference being the time frame, and I think I appreciate that there might be a bit of time required.
Okay.
Well, there's also a transit study that's being done, and they should all come together, as opposed to in pieces, right?
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, so all in favor? That carries, and that's a wrap. Thank you, everybody, for their patience and staying through lunch. That was very helpful to get that all accommodated. We are officially adjourned.